Hey, and welcome to a new episode of the Academy Anonymous podcast. A new season, I should say. This is season 3, where we are covering all the lead up to the Oscars. Big ceremony coming up. Actually, I think it's going to be the 99th Academy Awards, 99th Oscars.
Wow.
And that's dated for March 14, 2027.
Mm-hmm.
So new season, new first episode of the season. As always, I'm your co-host, Joseph.
And I'm Jules, and it's good to be back. Off the top, we'll just say again, as always, check us out on Twitter at Academy Anon and our website, framesofliquor.com. They're both posted on the cover art for the podcast. And a lot has happened since we last spoke, but the biggest thing to have happened was the Cannes Film Festival.
Right.
And we're privileged enough to attend this year. Like last year, it was an amazing time in Cannes. We love our time in Cannes. And there were several films, I think, that were top of mind of people to possibly think about for awards consideration or not. And we're going to be dissecting our takes.
Right, exactly. So a lot has happened. There's a lot to cover, but I think you and I specifically structured our new season around the idea that Cannes is the big daddy of film festivals that's going to have a tremendous effect as to the results of the nominees and the winners of the Oscars.
Let's just say that the Academy has gotten, as we've said several times, more international. And with that is the biggest festival in the world, the Cannes Film Festival, that becomes a predominant figure in that landscape. But I will say last year we did see a fall off in a way when the Palme d'Or winner, it was just an accident, failed to get an Oscar nomination.
Right.
And probably F1 probably took its slot right in the top 10, right?
Right. Yeah. I think let's set the stage a little bit with what you just said. Again, we're structured our programming around the Cannes Film Festival, made that the first episode of the season. A lot has been said about it. I'm going to ask you a general question later, but to set the stage, we're coming off a year where the Palme d'Or winner did not make it into the Best Picture list, and that was, you're right, Jafar Panahi's. It was just an accident, and that got the late pickup from Neon, and Neon tried to campaign it. And everyone was talking about, in the 11th hour, how they had sort of dropped the ball and it looked more and more vulnerable until at the very end, it did not get nominated, which was against our own prediction. We had thought Panahi would get nominated, especially with the current events that were surrounding Iran at that moment. But so aside from that, let's not lose sight of the fact that 2 Cannes films did make it into Best Picture, right? We had Secret Agent
and Sentimental Value,
and both of them were from Neon, right? But beyond that, we also had what was a really strong breakout award season for a film like Serrat, right, from Spain, which ended up being nominated for
sound design and foreign language film,
right? And some people, a bigger storyline from last year, of course, was these Cannes films dominating the international film race, right? Where you had all 4 of these films contend for international film. Again, all of them from Neon. So sort of like the narrative of the dominance of Cannes has sort of like evolved, right? With the dominance of Neon at Cannes and sort of the predisposition of there to be Neon films become significant players, to have Neon films become significant players at the Oscars. Like it's the same sort of headline, right? It's the same thing that's informing everything. And so the Palme d'Or winner does not make it into Best Picture, gets nominated for several Academy Awards, including a screenplay nomination. 2 Cannes films still make it in. Cannes films being nominated across the board. This was a strong year, considering that the year before you had The Substance, you had Emilia Perez, you had the eventual winner, Honora, and then before that you had Enemy Fall, you had Zone of Interest. So again, you're right, the Cannes dominance has been sort of taking over the Oscar narrative. Now, my question to you is, before we get started onto, looking at the actual lineup and talking about films and handicapping contenders and what we see as strengths and our opinion of where the race is headed, everyone was talking about how this was a quote-unquote soft Cannes. There was a lot of talk on the ground about how it was not living up to expectations. Did you hear that? And what is your opinion there?
I agree. I think as a whole, the films that I saw, especially in competition, I think lacked the resonance or the power of last year's lineup. And I do think that I saw very few what I would call great films.
Masterpieces.
Yes, certainly masterpieces, but I would go so far as to say even, great and spectacular. I have a handful that I really attached to, but I'm not sure that we saw something that I think is destined to be, the most acclaimed film of the year, or in the top 2 most acclaimed films of the year. Or let's say, I don't want to say acclaim is a strong word, but let's say, top 10s of the year. Technically last year wasn't either, but I think that there's a strong group of films that, again, I think most critics responded to and most people on the ground responded to, but I think that that's a minority and not, a huge number. And I think on the ground, if you were talking to colleagues, as we were, to our colleagues in the industry and filmmakers, I think they felt largely the same. I think that was a predominant feeling throughout the festival.
Why I think that's interesting is because, again, the pendulum, the predominance of the film festival pendulum has swung toward Cannes. And my question is if the Cannes that we just saw, the quote unquote soft Cannes, is going to result in a very competitive and a very striking lineup at Venice or Toronto or Telluride, where the masterpieces, because every year there are masterpieces, they will show up, right? The films that are going to be the heavy favorites and the most universally acclaimed films are going to show up. The opportunity has now exists for them to show up at a competing festival and sort of possibly swing that pendulum back away from Cannes, which could be interesting, right? Because at one point, the daddy of festivals was Venice, right? Where you had those big premieres. It was really close to award season, and they would have a stronger effect on the outcome for the Oscars in terms of nominees and winners more than Cannes, right?
Right, but I also think it might be indicative of a certain climate, economic turmoil, and certainly the economic landscape of the cinema business, that there are a few great films in this year's festival, and I think that might stretch on over to maybe the majority of the most prestigious festivals, and that we might be seeing a weaker crop in general as a symptom of these larger things happening in the business.
Which is kind of interesting, right? Because I feel like this was a talking point of last year's big Oscar winner, Paul Thomas Anderson, all year, right? When he would just say to everyone, anyone who called this a weak year in cinema can just fuck for the right off, you know?
Right.
But
I mean, you saw some of that last year also, when I think the most revered films were studio films, and these really big budgeted studio films. And I think outside of those studio films, art house films struggle to really make a huge impact. More than those studio films.
I think you're right. And so I wanted your opinion there. Now that we've said that, what I would like to do is I'd like to go through a couple of sections and point out the films that we specifically think are worth talking about in the context of the awards race and of the Oscar race. And I think the absolute best place to start is with main competition, which is where we get the majority of our contenders, even if films like Killers of the Flower Moon, Mad Max Fury Road, they premiered outside of that. Right. I think in competition is where you're going to find the bulk of serious contenders. And I think there's no better place to start than the big winner, which was FJORD, right? The Romanian film. You saw it. We had to divide our efforts. I did not see it. I want you to maybe speak toward the film. To set up the stage a little bit here, Neon had this film going in, right? Neon had a bunch of films going in, and this was one of the ones that they had. It was actually ended up being the second Palme d'Or for the filmmaker, right? Who you like his work a lot.
Well, we adore Cristian Mungiu. His films, he's a master Romanian filmmaker. This is his second Palme d'Or, as you said. I was lucky enough to attend the premiere. I was in the room when Cristian Mungiu was there, and Renata was there, and Sebastian Stan was there. And I think very much you could feel in the room that, it's very much a Cristian Mungiu film. If you're familiar with his films, you're familiar with the tone and the sort of distancing aesthetic that he has. At the same time, he makes political works, and they're very focused on, a lot of dialogue and conversation, and thematically has this very masterful way of being able to explore these very thorny and intricate topics. So I felt it was very much a piece of the fabric of his cinema. That being said, I thought it was a spectacular film. I loved it. And And I think a lot of people in the room felt that it was a very strong outing. And I was a little bit surprised that it was the Palme d'Or winner, but I'm not mad at it at all. I think it's among the top 3 films that I saw at Cannes this year. And just really quick for some context, Fjord is about a Romanian family that immigrates to Norway, and then the parents get accused of child abuse, and that opens a big can of very interesting thematic exploration that I'll get into in a minute. But interestingly enough, it's based on something that actually happened.
A lot of his work is.
As a lot of his work is. I didn't know that going into the film. I was able to talk to some of my colleagues while we were waiting to go into the film, and that's how I found out. And so in a way, there's this historical aspect, this modern historical aspect to most of Mungiu's work, which I think makes his cinema very fascinating. And this film, it's not what I pegged to be the Palme d'Or winner, but when you consider the themes it's exploring, very much talking about religious conservatism, and the tension between social liberalism, and it dabbles into topics of Christian nationalism. It also talks about the other. That's a big part of Mungiu's films. When a group or a person is sort of ostracized from the community because of their beliefs or because of their way of existing in the world. And again, it's very interesting cross section of these themes. These current political themes, especially with regard to religion and religious conservatism and religious Christian nationalism, etc. Right. I thought it was a very timely piece and very taut, and exceptionally well done. And so in that way, when you consider the themes of the film, I don't think it's that surprising that Park Chan-wook and his jury responded to so strongly to it. Well,
let's jump on that for a second, because I have specific questions for you, because again, you did see it, but you did mention something very important that I want to give context to before we go further, which is the jury. Okay, so the jury president is Park Chan-wook, right?
Right.
Famously left off of last year's Cannes, went to Venice. His film, No Other Choice, did not land any Oscar nominations, although it was heavily campaigned by, again, another neon film that did not make the final 5, right? But this jury also included Demi Moore, Ruth Negga, Stellan Skarsgård, Chloe Zhao, right? So an important thing about this whole Cannes mechanism, I think maybe you agree, is these juries are beefed up with not just prominent Oscar players, former nominees, but tastemakers, right? And so the election of the Palme d'Or by this jury is significant in terms of how a film could potentially play more broadly, right, to an Academy base that, as you said, is growing more and more international. That's the first thing that I wanted to say about what you mentioned. So I think it is significant that you have Chloe Zhao and Park Chan-wook already championing this type of film, right? The other thing I want to say before we get into the specifics is just for a little bit of context, because I want it to be sort of in your mind as you sort of, comment on these questions that I have for you, is just Romanian cinema. Okay. As we all know, the way cinema works is right. Usually in the grand scale of global cinema, at a time, there's 1 or 2 countries that dominate the conversation because of what's occurring at the moment. Romanian cinema, if you talk to me about it, the big name that comes up is actually not Christian. It's actually Radu Jude, right? Who's made a lot of really compelling, interesting films. A lot of them have been selected by Romania. But Christian is a cornerstone, right, of Romanian cinema, right? International cinema. And so he is very much like on that Mount Rushmore for people. His biggest breakthrough hit, of course, was 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, which was is I think now considered sort of a seminal film from back in 2007. It was one of the most critically acclaimed films of the year, to such a point where I remember in 2007, which was an absolute gift to cinema. We're talking about There Will Be Blood, No Country for Old Men, Diving Beyond the Butterfly. There were people stomping for 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days being the best film of the year. And it, I think, even scored, significant mentions at critics groups, for example, like National Society of Film Critics. Right. And that's important to keep in context as to where Fjord could possibly angle in to a bigger nomination than just foreign film. When we talk about Romanian films, the last film to be nominated from Romania was Collective, the documentary, which we were both big fans of back in 2020.
Right.
And Christian's previous film, Beyond the Hills, made the shortlist but did not get nominated. And I think pretty infamously, 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days did not even make the shortlist, even if it was an official selection. His film Graduation, I believe, was also selected. No, I'm wrong. Forgive me. Graduation did not get selected to represent Romania that year. Christian Mungiu, as you said, won his first Palme for 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. He was also a director winner for Graduation and a screenplay winner for Beyond the Hills, which also won the Cannes Award for Actress, right? So with that in mind, do you think it can break into the bigger categories? What about performances like Renata and Sebastian Stan? Because a lot of people are looking at those big performances, and maybe you should, I think some viewers don't know, like, how big of a foreign film is this? Is it English speaking? Is it mostly in Romanian?
Well, first I'll say, with regard to the foreign language, the film is mostly in a foreign language. I don't think there's going to be an issue there of, whether the film speaks too much English. I mean, there are some sections where Sebastian Stan, I remember, speaks some English, with an accent, but it's the minority. Most of the film is in Norwegian and has some Romanian language as well. So I don't think that'll be an issue. I'll say off the top that this is not a vehicle for acting. It's not a vehicle that's going to get Sebastian Stan his second nomination in only, 2-3 years?
2024.
Right, and it's not going to be the nomination that Renata gets as her second after last year's Sentimental Value. I know the temptation is going to be between now and when people see the film more widely, that Renata is coming in for her win, Sebastian Stan is coming in for the win. This is not a film like that. If you see Christian Mungiu's films, the performances are always very strong, but they're a backseat to what's happening in the context of the story and the subtext of the story and even the plot of the story.
Are they both leads? May I ask? Yeah.
Yes, they are. But I would say that in my opinion, Renata stood out a little bit more to me than Sebastian Stan. But I would say that they're both co-leads, and they'll both definitely be campaigned as co-leads. But they won't factor into the acting races.
What about the ensemble? Maybe. I mean, remember Neon infamously did horrendously at the Screen Actors Guild Award. That's like one big mountain they have yet to conquer. What about sort of the ensemble prospect here? Because it is sort of about a family.
No, it's not. Again, it's the focus is in the background almost, for it to be. Well, I don't want to say it's in the background, but the focus isn't the ensemble and isn't the acting and isn't these two, up and coming, really revered actors. It's the story that's being told and how Christian Mungiu is telling the story. So I think that you can take it out of consideration, or not consideration, but you can take it out of an acting nomination. I don't think that's going to happen, or an ensemble. It's not like Sentimental Value, where there was a core four, and we spent so much intricate time with these four characters that they end up doing really well in the ensemble races, even if it doesn't even get nominated for the SAG. This isn't that kind of film at all. I would say this is the kind of film that might get snubbed completely at the SAG.
Right.
In much the same way that It Was Just an Accident did too.
And Sentimental Value, everything. Anything that's what I'm saying. So this is not going to be.
But I would say that there's an excessive. This film is very interesting because I want to say that something about this film that I find very fascinating is, and watching it, I think the tension of these forces really makes for compelling cinema. And I think is one very big reason that it won is that, when this family gets accused of child abuse, all of a sudden they become the ostracized figures in this Norwegian society, and the child protection services of Norway and all the supporters of that branch and the community who supports what they stand for. In a way, as you're watching the film, you're seeing them being sort of the antagonists almost to this family. But at the same time, there are, Christian Mungiu's brilliance is how that is also being somewhat subverted, because some of the things that the family is being accused of, are things that are, relevant to explore and to consider. And so there's this interplay between these two forces that makes for very fascinating cinema. And at the very end, I found it to be quite devastating. The ultimate statement that's made in the Goliath versus David sort of interplay that's happening. I will say it's very subversive and it's very impactful.
I'm interested to,
but my point with that is that I can imagine a group of people watching this film that possibly whose political beliefs we don't align with personally, who might see this and might have a more superficial understanding of the story of religious freedoms being under attack. But if you're really seeing the film is really exploring. It goes beyond that. It goes beyond.
It's more dimensional.
It's much more dimensional. And like I said, there's a subversion that happens that I think is quite gut punching.
But you just point out something that I think is really interesting, right? Which is, and it hasn't happened yet, but it will occur as the season goes on when the film finally lands in the U.S. and premieres and more people get to see it. Which again, who knows how many people will see it, even with Renata and Sebastian Stan in it. There's already been some controversy, right, online and film Twitter, international viewers that were exposed to it at Cannes, about sort of the ideological conflict that's going on here, right? And that's going to be a little bit of a landmine to navigate.
I think it is, but I think it's it's one of the film's windows into being a film that's a talking point and that people discuss and that keeps it in this sort of atmosphere of relevancy throughout the year. Because you have those opposing views to what's being discussed. And so I find that very interesting, but I think it's a weapon that it can use to be a point of discussion throughout the year and ultimately have that kind of point of discussion lead to a Best Picture nomination in the top 10.
Okay, so you definitely think it's a Best Picture.
I don't think it's a shoo-in at all. I think that like Jafar Panahi's work, and it was just an accident, that's a very specific type of masterful filmmaker. That's a very specific type of cinema that I think was not accessible enough to the voting body at large for it to get a Best Picture nomination. I think you have the same detrimental factors in this film in the sense that it's a Christian Mungiu film through and through. If you respond to his cinema, you're going to love this film or you're going to respond to it. If you are not accustomed to his cinema, like I don't believe many of the members in the Academy were to Jafar Panahi's, case in point, he had never been nominated. Christian Mungiu has never been nominated. If you are not exposed to his type of cinema, then I think you stand to be a little bit, distant from it and not necessarily super responsive to it.
Perfect.
So I think that it's not a shoo-in whatsoever, but there's, I think, enough there in terms of acclaim and in terms of what it's talking about that it can certainly make a play for Best Picture nomination.
Yeah. Let me specify my interrogation a little bit more to give our listeners a little bit more clarity. It's been about a decade more or less since we've seen a Palme d'Or winner not figure into the race at all. The one film that didn't really sort of show up was Titan, the Palme d'Or winner. Other than that, there have been breakthrough successes like Anatomy of a Fall. Nora was an English language speaking film. We already know how that ended. But even something like in 2017, The Square, for example, still made it into foreign language. So do you at least think
Absolutely.
that this will be at least the first time that Christian gets into
Absolutely.
an Oscar category?
Absolutely.
And Romania's probably second nomination into
Absolutely. I absolutely do. But I think that if I were being honest, it's less to do with the film and it's more to do with the Palme d'Or win.
With the win. Interesting. Yes. And now...
and again, not knocking the film, he's a brilliant filmmaker, but I don't see him as the kind of filmmaker that they tend to embrace unless...
forced to.
Exactly.
Interesting. And then so here's my other specific here is when we're talking about the recent success of Cannes, of Palme d'Or at the Oscars, let's divide the conversation. There are the secret agents who managed to get in an expanded field, right? And then there are the Honoras, the Anatomy of a Falls, the Zone of Interest, Sentimental Value. These are top 5 movies. Is FJORD a top 5 movie? Or is it an expanded Best Picture movie?
Right now, I would say my impression is that it's a film that gets in because of an expanded Best Picture list.
Right.
But like it was just an accident, was not a top 5 movie. I don't see Christian Mungiu's cinema in general as being something that would make a top 5 movie for them.
Okay.
You know,
I think that's fascinating. I think we're gonna have a lot to talk about this film for the rest of the season. Certainly one of the biggest titles that people are going to be looking at, possibly one that's being overestimated at this point based on what you're telling me. Seems like it's going to be a very worthwhile film to watch. Certainly sounds like the kind of film that would benefit from a sweep from a lot of critic awards, but there's still so much movies left to be seen.
Right.
But a lot of interesting things going on there. I want to jump now to another film in competition, right? And this was a film that I had pegged for the win because I wasn't sure that Christian Mungiu could score 2 Palme d'Ors. Again, last person to do that, Ruben Östlund. I believe Michael Haneke did it. Interestingly enough, they were both eventually Best Picture nominees, right? That's kind of interesting. But I thought the win for the Palme d'Or would go to Andrei Zvyagintsev for Minotaur. Yeah. Why? Because he had never won before, and he's been well represented at the festival, and I thought it would be a moment to finally give him a big award. He was also coming off what was a sort of a life-altering experience because it's sort of a near-death experience from what I understand. But he had previously won the Screenplay Award for Leviathan. He won the Jury Prize for Loveless. Both of them Academy Award nominees in the foreign language category. But it did not win. It ended up winning the Grand Prix.
Right.
And so I wonder, first of all, we both had the opportunity to watch this film, which is great because we can talk about it. But also, I want to say that this film came into the festival with Mubi behind it.
Yeah.
Right? Who was finally able to crack the Best Picture list with The Substance, although it was an English language film. I always wonder if the fact that it is not a neon film is what kept it from winning the Palme d'Or. And it's going to stay in the back of my mind forever. I haven't seen Fjord. Sounds like a brilliant film. Could just be that. But I wonder, all things being equal, would this have been the difference maker for Andre to finally win the Palme d'Or? Like I said, I do think if you're on the ground, here's what people don't know. If you're on the ground in the festival, neon is working the crap out of this festival.
100%.
There's just so much people and machinery that they bring to this thing in terms of, press
to all of their films.
To all of their films, no matter which section. And it is a stark contrast to almost every other film that plays in a section.
Yes.
Whether it's competition, Uncertain Regard, Director's Fortnight, you'll know it's a neon movie because the wheels are turning.
100%.
Right? And it feels like everyone is there to watch a movie, and it feels like neon is there to sell something.
Yeah.
That's how much cameras they have there. That's how much videography they have going on, and their entire team. So neon they dominate this festival, but they work the crap out of it.
Yeah.
I guess maybe because so much of their business and their brand and their strategy is tied into it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Minotaur, a movie film, Grand Prix, second prize.
Yes.
So what are you thinking here? Is there breakthrough potential? I thought if this was a Palme d'Or winner, that this was a slam dunk top 5 film, but it is not a Palme d'Or winner.
Okay, so I think again, Andrei Zvyagintsev, pardon me, is an incredibly brilliant filmmaker. We have been fans for him for a very long time. He's a masterful filmmaker. Every frame of his films are so deliberate and calibrated and powerful. I do think that personally for me, this film resonated with me a tiny bit less than Loveless and Leviathan, but certainly it was very rapturously received from critics. And it's a very interesting project for Andre in the sense that it's, using the Claude Chabrol novel, An Unfaithful Wife, I believe.
Yeah, the film, yeah.
Which, if that brings up memories of Dan Lane and Unfaithful, it's because it's the same source material. And he's, combining that with, the political climate of the after, the afterwards of the Ukraine,
invasion,
Russia war. And it's very meticulous. It's very hefty in a way. Timely, but it's certainly very auteur and very austere.
See, I
was gonna say, to your point of it being a film that could be a top 5, I would never see a film like this from Andrei Zvyagintsev figuring into a top 5 for the Academy because, again, like Fjord, it's a very specific type of cinema, and it's a very specific type of art house cinema that I don't think they respond to in mass enough for it to be a top 5 film. It's the same reason why last year Sentimental Value, which, you know, if you're aware of Joachim Trier's work, is very of the vein,
piece, yeah.
you know, of a piece with his previous work, but it's also very accessible. You know, when you talk about titans like in the world cinema, like Andre and like Christian, I think we're talking about a more specific type of cinema that it doesn't lend itself to be as accessible as those films. Sentimental Value.
See, for me, I kind of think the opposite. I feel like the film reminds me a lot of Honora, in that even if it's not English language speaking, the political context of it and the sociological context of it, and the timeliness of the piece in terms of everything that's going on in Ukraine, the overreaching power of oligarchs, political corruption, all these real world thematics of the film sort of elevated. But there's something incredibly accessible about the film. You're using a very familiar framework from the Chabrol film, from the Adrian Lyne film. And I feel like that's an easy access point, in sort of the same way that people said, Honora, there's a pretty woman aspect to it, right? And so again, this is why the Palme d'Or thing, I would have said cemented it as a top 5 film, is because there's something that I think is incredibly accessible to it. Yet nonetheless, the political statement is so precise and, you know, pointed that it can't help to resonate to audiences. At the same time, I also think there's something about the idea of the statement finally coming from within, right? Coming from someone who...
A Russian filmmaker.
A Russian filmmaker, someone who knows that system better than anyone else, right? And so to me, that's what I thought would have pushed the film into a top 5 movie if it had won the Palme d'Or, but it didn't win that Palme d'Or. But I'm interested. I will be interested to see what happens, because technically, like, just on a numbers, you know, point of view, here's a filmmaker who's been in international film at the Oscars twice, right? So had it won the Palme d'Or, it would have been the perfect situation. He's already been in foreign film. He'll be there again this year. He'll graduate to Best Picture. There's, again, the timeliness of the movie, where he's at in his career, the statement that he's making, but there's an accessibility to it. The only thing missing is distributed by Neon. Again, I feel like if it was distributed by Neon, things might have been different. But on paper, I feel like they're ready to give this filmmaker a bigger nomination than just foreign film, international film. So I think there's that.
That's a good point.
I think we both sort of see it competing in international
100%,
film, right?
for sure.
Right. And again, international film rules have changed as you know, you sort of investigated them. So what's that new rule?
So I think the 2 most important rules is, the most important rule is that you no longer have to be submitted by the country to qualify, so long as you won a top award in a specific group of film festivals. You can still be submitted for consideration. And I believe those festivals are the Cannes Film Festival, the Palme d'Or, the Berlinale, the Sundance Film Festival,
Venice,
the Venice Film Festival, the Busan Film Festival,
and Toronto, I think,
and the Toronto, I think, Platform Award.
Right.
If so long as you win those prizes, you can be in consideration.
You're sort of automatically.
So, for example, Anatomy of a Fall was not submitted by France, but the fact that it won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, you can gives it enough of it can be submitted for a foreign language film.
And the reason why I bring that up is obviously it didn't win the Palme d'Or, so it does not have the automatic submission. But
it doesn't stand to be.
It's not going to be submitted by Russia, right? Who has opted not to submit. But it is co-production, right? So now you have a chance for a country that was also a co-producer on Christian's film to instead possibly submit this film. Yeah. I want to mention really quickly sort of a quiet scene stealer at Cannes, which is...
I'm not sure it was that quiet. But
well, okay. I mean, we'll talk about it. But I want to talk about how MINOTAUR features producer Marco Parejo, I hope I'm saying that right, who most listeners will know as a filmmaker, but also the partner of Zoe Saldana, who's an Academy Award winner. And Marco actually had several films in Cannes and several of them in competition. He was also one of the producers on Fjord. And so I think he mentioned himself, I think, on social media that it's first producer to win both a Palme d'Or and a Grand Prix in the same ceremony.
I take a lot of issue with that. I think it's very weird to, post a message post Cannes saying, I'm the first producer to win both the Cannes. First of all, the producer doesn't win the Palme d'Or or the Grand Prix. I'm pretty sure that's the director who represents the country. And second of all, he wasn't the only producer in those both films.
But he might have been the only one that shared.
Right. True. But I find that to be very odd.
Right. I think it's a little bit. I also think
it's a little odd to have him, some people might recognize that he had during the Zoe Saldana year, the Emilia Perez year, he had a short film that was also in consideration.
Yeah.
Made the final list.
Did it make the short list?
It made the short list of short films to be considered for live action. Mm-hmm. But how did all of a sudden Marco end up with like 4 films in the Cannes Film Festival? Because he doesn't have a huge trajectory as a producer either. I think it's a little strange.
It's a little strange, but you tip your hat to them because it's an impressive thing to have so many films at Cannes. So I mean, it's a little bit strange, but obviously he knows talented filmmakers and good films when he sees them. But why I bring that up more importantly was because I overlooked something about Fjord, which was producers, right? And I do think it's worth mentioning that on Fjord, as you mentioned, which you've sort of expressed some skepticism about it being a top 5 film, I think it's worth mentioning that it does have 2 Oscar-winning producers already behind it, which is Pascal Cacheteau, I hope I'm saying that right, from Emilia Perez, was also nominated for an Oscar. And Andrea Berenstain Otmar was a producer of last year's Sentimental Value. Interestingly
enough, both films were not Palme d'Or winners.
Ooh, very interesting. I had not thought of that, but yes, you're right. But I did want to mention that. So moving on from Fjord, the next one I want to talk about actually is a film that I think you and I were pretty close to saying could walk away with the Palme d'Or, and that's All of a Sudden. The new film from Hamaguchi.
From Ryosuke Hamaguchi. I was fortunate enough to see that movie. I think we both saw that film. Yeah. I will say that I thought it was my favorite film at the festival. We're big fans of Ryosuke Hamaguchi. He's an incredible artist, and this is yet another beautifully introspective, meditative work. I was incredibly moved by it. I even had some tears throughout the film. It's being released by Neon. As we all know, Ryosuke has some history with the Academy because he was nominated for Best Director and he won the Foreign Language Oscar for Drive My Car.
And was nominated for Best Picture as well.
Right.
But that was coming off of Janus. So this is actually, I think, the first time.
Collaboration with Neon.
Yeah.
Right. It ended up winning the Best Actress prize. It was shared between Virginie Efiro, who's an incredible actress, and Tao Okamoto, who I wasn't familiar with, but she also gives a very stirring performance. Both actresses were incredibly moving in this film, and this is a very, very, very deserved award.
A very deserved shared award, right? Yes, because this is definitely one of those tour films.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Beautiful performances. I wish I could have seen the film land into the top 3 somewhere. Mm-hmm. But I completely understand the being compelled to give it the Best Actress prize. Again, one of the best awards that day. Very, very deserved. And like I said, I think it's an incredible film, incredible achievement.
And again, I also thought that between Japan being the country of honor this year and Hamaguchi only scoring screenplay for Drive My Car, that it really positioned it in a really good place to give it its first Palme d'Or to Hamaguchi instead of, again, a second Palme d'Or to Christian. But it didn't turn out that way, but I'm really glad to see it won something. Now, I guess big question here is, can it actually break through anywhere? And I guess most people are maybe going to jump to actress, but I have my doubts. But I mean, what other places do you think? Because it's very much a Hamaguchi film.
Yes, very much.
And Drive My Car needed an extraordinary amount of support to break into the categories that it broke into.
I feel the same way. I think that the film needed that boost of being a top 2 winner at Cannes to make it all the way. I think there will be fans for the performances, but I don't know that it's enough to make the top 5. You know, his films, if you're familiar with his films, they're very dialogue driven and they're very few setups. I think this film, they're also lengthy. So this film is close to 3 hours.
50. 2 hours 50.
3 hours, and very few setups. I'm talking about a handful of setups. Mm-hmm. It's very conversation driven, very dialogue driven. again, very meditative experience. And so I think that his films aren't prone to having that sort of mass appeal that I think that would result in a Best Picture nomination unless it had something like the Palme d'Or win, or this huge critics push like Drive My Car did. So I'm a little bit less sure about that film.
What about the idea of it breaking into another category, maybe like screenplay? I mean, I remember his previous film before this that went to Venice, which was also a brilliant film. I think Janus released it. There is Evil Does Not Exist. Was a fantastic film as well. Film. I think critics are going to line up behind this film, and they're going to want to give it something. It is 2 hours 50. One thing we didn't talk about was just the badge of honor of the success that Hamaguchi has had, because this is his first French film.
Yeah.
Right? He's moved the story into France.
Yeah.
Virginie's in it. But it was successful. It doesn't always happen, but it was a very successful.
But French isn't the only language spoken in the film, though.
It's not. It's not. But I will say that a lot of filmmakers, when they move away from the country where they have been making films most often, it's not always a smooth transition. You know, we'll talk about it. I mean, Oscar Fajardi is possibly a poster child for what we're talking about here.
Right.
But it is a neon film. A Palme d'Or, as you said, would have made a difference. But do you think it has a chance anywhere else?
Right now, I think it's best. Right now, I think its best bet is foreign language film.
Mm-hmm. Where Japan would submit it again.
I think so. Right now, I'm seeing that as its best bet. Unfortunately, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see it factoring into the final 5 for actress, or director, or picture.
Other above the line categories. I mean, I think an important thing to talk about also, it's now's as good a time as any to drop it, is just the idea that one category that has just been extraordinarily kind to Cannes forever really, is Best Director. And so we will be seeing a Cannes director make it into the top 5. I guess so far you think that maybe Christian is in the best position to do that with the Palme one?
Yeah.
Okay. The next film I want to talk about is actually a really interesting one, because a lot of these films sort of came to the party with a dance partner, and this film did not, and it sort of exploded onto the cassette and the final couple of days of the festival, I think, and that's the Spanish film La Bola Negra. Right. And I want to talk about a couple of things here. First, it's from the Javis, who maybe some listeners know most notably from their Netflix show, right?
Paquita Salas,
I believe, which is a little bit of a runaway hit. But these filmmakers,
in Spain, I believe.
In Spain, it does show globally. I've seen episodes, but it is in Spanish. It's not as big here as I think it is in Spain. But I want to say a couple of things. Okay, so Romanian cinema, I think, has been having a moment with Radu, even if Christian stands to possibly capitalize on that moment the best with this recent win. But I think Spain has been sort of cooking to have a moment too, especially after last year's Serrat, right? And so I think there was a lot of excitement, again, on the ground from the Spanish industry for this film.
You were lucky enough to be at the premiere.
I was at the premiere.
You had a front seat.
Had a very good seat. Really interesting. It was a really interesting film. But there was a lot of Spanish love for that movie, and a lot of Spanish industry people, a lot of Spanish press, and people who like Spanish cinema, and they were really celebrating this moment for these two filmmakers. Certainly their biggest film to date. I'm not sure if it's their first film. I don't think it is, but it's by far and away their biggest film in terms of where it has landed on the international scale of filmmakers called the Javis. What's interesting, I think, to me, to note here is that not unlike Serrat, I believe, there's some Almodovar support here. Almodovar being a mentor to the Javis, right?
Right. El Deseo Productions.
El Deseo Productions is involved here. El Deseo has made, substantial, prominent, permanent inroads with the Academy. This film ends up winning Best Director. And ends up winning Best Director in a tie, which we'll talk about after. A lot of people pegged this for one of the top 3 films, and some people were talking about the Palme d'Or. Yeah. Sort of a big, epic queer love story going on in 3 different moments in time, sort of crisscrossing between each other.
But there's a historical
aspect to it, right?
With Lorca.
They talk about Lorca,
but the people might not know this, but La Bola Negra is in reference to
Lorca's work, right? Yeah. That was, I believe, unpublished. But so there's this historical context to the film. There's also this, it's going on in the eve of war. And so there's other thematics to the film. Obviously, queer identity is a massive theme in the film. But so a lot of people were pegging this as possibly a top 3 winner. And so this film was one of the few, and we'll talk about the other one, that ignited a bidding war. There was a bidding war for this movie after what people wrote about as a 20-minute standing ovation. Again, I was there.
I want to ask that. I want to ask that. You were there, and we've been fortunate enough to be in these rooms several times. And I wonder, as someone who was there, did it feel like 20 minutes? Because I think the conversation quickly became, that it broke history. And I think no film has ever gotten as much applause. I think last year Sentimental Value might have broken that. And this year, this film broke it.
Right.
Did it feel like it was 25 minutes?
It felt.
Because while you're in the room, people it doesn't, you'd be surprised how fast 20 minutes can pass by.
Okay.
So it doesn't seem like it would be true, but
right.
Before you know it, 20 minutes have elapsed.
Okay. So to begin with, I think there's nothing more absurd than timing.
Right.
I want to know who's timing it. It's the most ridiculous thing of life. It did feel like 20 minutes to me. It just felt like at one point the crowd was just happy standing and it was happy to stay standing. And, the Javis were having a moment and they were dancing and their team was dancing and they were very jovial and it's very infectious. And as someone who saw the film, and I think it's incredibly ambitious, it's one of those films that I think the ambition exceeds the filmmaker's reach.
I agree.
And you felt the same way. What I felt was also, that ambition deserves to be applauded, is very admirable. And I tweeted this on our account at Academy Anon that, win or lose the Palme d'Or, and no matter how far it gets in the Oscar race, what it has definitely done is announce the Javis as filmmakers to watch and filmmakers that will be co-opted into the Hollywood system sooner rather than later. That's how successful the film is in terms of, the story it wants to tell, the scale of story, the sheer size of the production, again, the sheer ambition of the piece. And so I felt like the room was really applauding that. Again, we have to go back to the headline, which is a quote unquote soft can. And so by this point, we're the festival is winding down.
Right.
People
desperate,
are chomping on the bit to find something to be super excited about and be super surprised by and just be super floored by. And I think people just really wanted a big, epic movie. And, some people are going to, I think there's a little bit of a lack of refinement here. I'm not going to call it messy, but I do think that there could be more precision.
100% I agree. 100% I agree.
But I feel like the desire to just have something big and incredibly ambitious sort of superseded people's, criticisms about maybe the flaws in the piece. And so a lot of people, I think, were in that room just happy to stand up and happy to see
but you also
was that big in scale.
Yeah, but you also told me that you felt that a lot of the people in the room were very of a piece.
This is the other thing. The other thing I would say is, again, in the room, there is a lot of people who want to see the film succeed. So there's a lot of people from the Spanish industry and a lot of people who want to see a prominent space in international cinema for Spanish cinema. And a lot of fans from Spain, a lot of fans from Hispanic America and Latin America. And so I definitely think that plays into why the reception was so warm. Penelope Cruz is there and she's lovely and that helps a lot as well. So I think the timing is absurd, but I definitely think it got the job done, which is it ignited a bidding war, right? And so here's who supposedly was bidding for this film. It was A24, Netflix, Mubi, and Neon were all in a bidding war. It ended up going to Netflix. This was one of the few acquisitions that was done during the festival. So Netflix bought it while the festival was still going on before they had actually, quote unquote, won or lost the Palme d'Or, even though some people were joking that, the Netflix buy automatically means that it's not going to win the Palme d'Or.
I was of that opinion. I thought that if it was, because you saw it before I did. And, when you were telling me what the conversation was going on, revolving around a possible Palme d'Or win, I thought, well, if Neon hasn't bought it yet, then it's not going to win.
Or again, the opposite. Remember, this is what happened with Open Eye last year. If Neon buys it tomorrow, it's because Neon knows that we have to have this movie. It's going to land in the top 3. But Neon sort of held back from buying it. part of us, you and I talked about like they're over leveraged. They just don't have the money to buy anything else.
But I go further and I'd say they didn't buy anything because they knew they had the winners among their group.
Yeah, that's a very solid point. That's a very solid point. But so Netflix ends up buying this during the festival, with the promise of a theatrical release and an awards campaign. We'll see how big that theatrical release is. I really doubt it. Certainly, you and I are thinking this is the favorite to be nominated. To be shortlisted from Spain for international film. It's a big production, right? And one of the sort of more, I guess, I would call bigger conversations about the pieces, because it is such a big production. There's enough work here for it to make some noise in the categories. For example, I think it was a beautifully lensed film.
It is very beautifully
I think
lensed.
it could figure into cinematography. The production design is gorgeous. The music is nice. Sound work is good. So many below the line categories. This is one of the few films, in my opinion, that played in competition that has a below the line sort of life. People have been talking about how Netflix, this fits into their strategy of having a foreign film that they will then campaign to a Best Picture nomination or bigger nominations, sort of like All Quiet on the Western Front. I don't think that's off the table, but I'm not sure it's a slam dunk. So, I mean, where do you figure the film right now?
I don't see it as a film that's going to factor into the top 10 for Best Picture. I agree with some of the criticisms you've placed on the film. I did think it was a little bit imprecise. I thought it was a little, for lack of a better term, a little green. It's a film that's simultaneously very ambitious and also almost, insufficient, in terms of its screenplay, its writing, its concept. Or it's a very high concept, but I think it's underdeveloped in a way, which is odd to say of a film that's so long because it's nearly 3 hours as well.
Yes, it is.
I didn't feel that the three stories meshed as well together all the time. It doesn't always land, but certainly I think the film has an appeal because if you were on the ground, it certainly had its fans among critics and also among cinephiles. It has an appeal that some of these other more austere works of art I think are more at a disadvantage of. So I think that's something to consider. I think that's something that Netflix knows that it can weaponize. So I think that's certainly true of this film. But I think it means something that it won the Best Director prize and it didn't win the Palme d'Or or the Grand Prix. So I think it's sort of like Park Chan-wook and his jury admired the ambition, but some of those inadequate aspects to the film keep it from being great. And keep it from winning an award like the Palme d'Or.
I love something that you just said, and I want to expand on it because we've been talking about how the Palme d'Or pushes Fjord, possibly an unconventional Oscar movie, into the top of the conversation. I think Minotaur is a more conventional pick that with the Palme d'Or would have been perfectly cemented. But sometimes it's more about the race you run than where you start out with. To me, as you said, this is the kind of movie where right now I'm sort of pegging it Spanish submission, maybe a breakthrough below the line somewhere, right. Possibly a top 5 finish of a foreign film. But Netflix still has the opportunity to mold this into a very compelling campaign that could very much figure into the top 10. Right. I'm not dismissing it from that, but I will say that a lot of it will depend on the dedication that Netflix provides to the film. Right? Do you agree there?
Yeah, I agree.
We're like, this isn't the kind of film that, okay, had it gotten the Palme d'Or would have pushed it firmly into that top 10. Maybe I would have even said top 5, considering that it's a film that I think may be more accessible, less austere than the Romanian film, as you said. But this is still a film that Netflix can work some Netflix magic and some marketing and publicity and campaigning magic and still turn this into a prominent contender. But it'll depend on Netflix. If they shift their focus to 2 or 3 other films, then this will not be that.
I think the film is lacking this. Well, I guess you're right. I guess it's going to depend on what Netflix, the final award slate for Netflix will be. But I think Emilia Perez gets the push that it is because it's Netflix's number 1 priority. So I think that's kind of what you're implying.
And the Jacques Audiard thing helps as well.
Right, exactly. And like I said, that film walked out with 2 prizes. It walked out with the Actors Prize and the Jury Prize. This to me feels like a breakout moment for the Javis that lands them a foreign language film nomination for Spain, which I think to me is a slam dunk. But I'm not sure I'd see it squeaking in beyond that personally for me.
Right. To me, I feel like this is the kind of film where it'll be less about the film and more about the campaign. One thing that I do want to touch upon before we move forward is we got to talk about the performances, right? And so some people have already been banging the drum for Glenn Close, who does speak Spanish in the film for a little bit.
She does speak Spanish, which is impressive.
Penelope Cruz, right?
Right.
And so where are we at there?
I think that Penelope Cruz and Glenn Close will not be nominated for this. You know, Glenn Close has a total of 3 scenes in, again, a 3-hour film.
10 minutes maybe?
Less than 10 minutes. Less than 10 minutes. And it's very regulated to one of the stories.
She really just shot that one day.
Yeah. It feels like she shot it in one day.
And she does speak some English in it as well.
Yeah. But Power, you know, I respect that. I respect her showing up for emerging artists like the Javis. I will say that I think Penelope Cruz also shows up for one moment in the film for a total of maybe 3 scenes also.
I'm calling that a sequence.
It's basically a sequence.
Yeah. I'm calling Glenn as a scene and Penelope is a sequence.
Right. It's a sequence. It happens, I think, midway through the film. I think she's a very bright spot of the film. You know, it's lovely to see her. It's, you know, she's a fiery character. She's theatrical, but it's very small. And, you know, both of those performances kind of get buried under the weight of the story that's trying to be told.
Right.
So I think that I would caution anybody out there that thinks that that's going to happen for supporting. It's not.
There is a theatrical element to Penelope's work in the film, right?
Of course, yes.
Which helps because she did get nominated for her theatrical work.
Literally, there is, you know, she's
literally
a
performer in it. That might be something to look out for.
Sure, but honestly, it's just not enough to land a supporting actress nomination for either.
What it is, I think, is maybe more fuel for the fire that Penelope is going to have an excellent year in cinema this year. Remember, she's also going to play sort of a sultry character in The Invite from Olivia Wilde, right? So she's sort of like, I think, and we'll revisit this conversation with another actor next. But again, I don't think it's going to land her a nomination. It's going to help her land the next nomination, whenever that is, right? Remember, she's coming off a nomination for Hello Mothers, where she didn't have a huge trajectory to get in there.
Right.
But there will be fans of hers, as there will be fans of hers throughout the year, right? Okay. So moving on from there, I want to talk about the film that ended up tying La Bola Negra for Best Director, and that's Fatherland. And so, of course, this is the new film from Polish filmmaker Paweł Pawlikowski. I think early on, this was one of the films that premiered earlier in the festival, and I think after it did premiere, it did become sort of a favorite to possibly win one of the big prizes, possibly in the Palme d'Or. Worth mentioning that Paweł has not won one of the big prizes yet. Actually, he only won, I believe, Best Director beforehand for his work in Cold War. This was yet another reason why I thought he might have a more competitive chance to win the Palme d'Or, but they sort of saddled him with Best Director again, I believe. And so we have some staples now of Paweł Pawlikowski film, black and white. Lucas Zal, you did get a chance to see this film?
I was fortunate enough to see the film. I was fortunate enough to attend the premiere. I was there, you know, with Paweł, and I was there, you know, Sandra Hüller was there, and the actor that plays Thomas Mann was there. I thought
August
the film,
didn't go? August Diel?
August Diel was there as well. It was it's an incredible actor that we're big fans of. I thought it was a very beautiful film. I thought it was beautifully rendered, you know, very of a piece with Paweł's work. It's very condensed, but also very precise, very effective. It's taking place during the height of the Cold War. Like I said, Thomas Mann is traveling through Germany, you know, Germany in ruins with his daughter Erica. August Diel plays the brother, and he has a short time in the film, but has an important part that sort of hovers over the entire piece as well. And it's a very well acted film. It's a very well rendered film. The cinematography is gorgeous, to the surprise of nobody. And it's just a very well done film. I will say that I think in the room, it felt that, you know, people were very receptive to the piece, but maybe not as enthusiastic as something like Cold War or Ida.
I kept hearing that on the ground.
That's what it felt very much on the ground, even though critics were very rapturous about it. On the ground, it felt like it was maybe amongst, let's say, those 3 black and white films would place on most people's third.
Right.
I had one colleague who was who's in the industry, and he likened it to like a marble, like a marble stone, or a slab of stone that's really well done and really beautiful, but it's hard to penetrate. And I don't know if that image makes sense. But
it's kind of interesting because I think of, Pavel's previous two films. There is a very strong emotional core in Ida and in Cold War.
There isn't?
There is.
Yeah.
That there is. I don't know if you feel that this film also has as strong an emotional core as either of those previous films.
That's a good point. Possibly less, but his point was that it's, visually striking and very well rendered. But again, just hard to penetrate past the sort of well doneness of it all.
Right.
And I thought that was an interesting comparison, but it felt like that was a general impression from, at least on the ground, talking to other colleagues and filmmakers. But again, very beautifully rendered. And not surprised that it walked out with something, and not surprised that they would give it the Best Director award. I think playing earlier in the festival might have something to do with, it's hard to sustain the momentum for for 2 weeks. I think it was the second premiere that I attended. Well, the first premiere I attended the second day.
You know what's funny? Didn't Surratt win Best Director also?
No, it won the jury prize. Likewise, it played very early.
Very
on the
early,
fest.
yeah.
And so I thought that was interesting and might have played a part as to why it only got the Best Director prize. I don't think this is a film that stands to get nominated for acting, and I know we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. I think its best possible. I think its best bet is foreign language film, and a cinematography mention. I can see Lucas Zell repeating a nomination for his work here.
You think so?
I can see it.
It would be a third. That would be, I believe, his third nomination.
I can see it.
Third black and white nomination with Pavel. You think it can really happen?
It can happen.
Wow.
I think it can happen. Again, it's very beautifully rendered. I don't think it's a slam dunk either, but I don't see this as a film that's going to factor into the acting races, and don't see it as something that's going to factor into the Best Director itself.
Well, I do want to mention, before we go a little bit more specific in it, this comes to the festival with Mubi, right? Which we've already named for Minotaur, but this is coming in with Mubi. Pavel's last film, which was a big success at the Oscars, Cold War, went in with Amazon. Ida was also a huge film for the Oscars, 2 nominations. But this is their first time working together, I think, Pavel and Mubi. And I think, sort of like the Penelope Cruz thing, we have to talk about
Sandra Hüller.
Right.
The great Sandra Hüller is having an amazing year. You and I were fortunate enough to see Rose earlier this year. Is an incredible film, among my favorite films of the year thus far.
We'll revisit this in another episode.
Yeah. Right, absolutely. But my point is that she's having an amazing year, and she has Rose, which I believe is going to Mubi as well.
Yes, it is. It is.
She had the breakout hit Project Hail Mary. She has a supporting part in that.
We'll visit
she
this
has
later.
This film. It's a very supporting part as well. And I think people are really waking up to just what a treasure of an actress she is. She's been around for a very long time. We have been fans of hers for a very, very long time. But she's having a very pivotal moment here. But this film won't be the thing that lands her a supporting actress nomination. And we've had several discussions. I'm very high on her performance in Rose. I think it's the performance of the year thus far. She's utterly amazing in it. She absolutely deserves to get an eye for Best Actress for Rose. I'm hoping that there's a big critics push to make that happen. And I can certainly see it happening for Rose. I don't know if you can. She's certainly very deserving of that Oscar nomination. I don't think it's the same thing here. I think it's a smaller part, and she shares it with the actor who's playing Thomas Mann, who has more of a, who's more in the foreground. It's a quieter part. It's more nuanced. Unlike Rose, where she's in much of the film,
right,
is just, kind of penetrating her gaze and her presence.
Right.
So I don't see it for acting, but you're right. She's having an incredible year.
We're going to revisit this, I think. Again, this is our first episode of the season, but we'll be revisiting the topic of Sandra Hüller. But as you said, what it is, I think, is just another standout moment in what is going to be an exceptional year for her. We're talking about someone who was in the Berlin red carpet, is now in the Cannes red carpet, was in the biggest Hollywood hit of the year, is likely thus far, and is likely going to be walking down the Venice carpet because she will be with Tom Cruise and Iñárritu in Digger.
Yeah.
And so very much what it is, I think, is just continued fuel to the fire that this is going to be another exceptional year for her, following the exceptional year she had in 2023 with Zone and with Anatomy of a Fall.
I will say though, when you put those products side by side, and you put what is undoubtedly, I thought, an incredible film in Rose and an absolutely devastating performance in Rose, a rapturously acclaimed film like Fatherland in Cannes, a breakout hit in Project Hail Mary, and what stands to be, a well-received film to some degree, Digger. It's hard to imagine her not landing a nomination somewhere. And so I would say that her best bets right now, having not seen, Digger, I would say would probably be Rose, which again, she's very deserving of, and Digger. I think that the quadruple effect of all four being successful films will land her either in the Best Actress Contenders top 5 for Rose, or in the Best Supporting Actress Contenders top 5 for Digger. I believe she's a supporting actress in that film.
I believe so, but we'll have to wait and see.
I don't think that the other two films, however well received they are, Fatherland and Project Hail Mary, are kind of enough to land into the supporting nomination. But those two other films, I think, stand to be the benefactors of the year she's had.
She's going to end up being, what is it? It's June. I guess you can call it now. My prediction is she ends up being the winner for Best Actress at the National Society of Film Critics for her body of work, right? And it'll be very much deserved. But we'll be revisiting this topic later because there's a lot to talk about with those films and this performance. But certainly this just adds to the fire that it's going to be a remarkable year for her. So I think that's where we're at for the winners. I'm going to revisit some of them towards the end, but I want to take a break now we've been talking about the winners in competition, but I want to talk about a couple competition films that walked out with zero, walked out empty-handed. And I want to start with one of the ones that you had a chance to see that people were very excited about towards the beginning. And it was one of the few American films, I think, added, kind of late to the festival competition slot. And that's Paper Tiger from James Gray, who is a mainstay at Cannes. We sort of tweeted about this, a mainstay at Cannes, and, unfortunately, a 4 or 5 time loser at Cannes. His films never actually win anything. He finally went in there this year with the Neon behind him. If it was ever going to happen for him, you would think it would be Neon, who has all that muscle and all that groundwork going on. People were incredibly excited about this film, right? And what is usually the case, that first weekend in Cannes, they really want to have the stars out there in force. And you had Scarlett Johansson, Adam Driver, Miles was there. So you had a chance to see the movie. We're big James Gray fans. James Gray fans. First time working with Neon, I believe. James Gray, not only undervalued at Cannes, where he's never won anything, although he's always invited. I also want to say incredibly, dismissed by the Academy. We're talking about so many remarkable films, but really they have never, ever landed at the Academy except one nomination for Ad Astra, which he, I think, said he was not necessarily the most pleased with, working with a bigger studio, working with IMAX, working with Brad Pitt. None of those things are going on in Paper Tiger. There's no Brad Pitt, there's no IMAX. But I remember, for example, a couple years ago when Armageddon Time showed up at Cannes, another really beautiful film, and it had what I think is one of truly moving, amazing performance from Anthony Hopkins, sort of late in his career, had everything it needed to be known for supporting actor, did not factor in anywhere whatsoever. And so, so Paper Tiger, people were high on it. You saw it. What's going on?
So Paper Tiger, just roughly, two brothers played by Adam Driver and Miles Teller get embroiled into this Russian scheme that's happening, and that affects their families. They're not a part of the scheme, but they get involved in it in a way. It was very rapturously received during the premiere, which I was not able to attend. But it was a huge premiere. Cate Blanchett was there, I believe.
This first weekend of Cannes.
So it was huge.
All the glitz has to come out.
Right. And there were already people claiming that it was a possible Palme d'Or winner and that it was an absolute Oscar contender, and then to walk out with nothing at the award ceremony kind of started to, it really dampened its momentum in a way.
Right.
I know that when I went to go see it, I told you the line was around the block to get into the theater. And so, again, we're big James Gray fans. He makes very cinematic works of art. And this is another cinematic rendering from him. I would say that if you have spent any time with James Gray's films, I think you understand that his cinematic eye kind of takes precedence over necessarily the script or the plot of the film. It's more about how he renders his cinema in a way that is so memorable and really sticks to you, more than say what the story is really about. His, again, cinematic eye in a way is unparalleled. It's very specific, very singular, very kind of, lavish in its beauty, but also very intimate in a way. And his performances tend to be very memorable as well. And so I think that the reception from the theater that I was in was very receptive to it. There's a thriller aspect to this film, insofar as the brothers get more embroiled into this dilemma. It becomes there's a thrillerness aspect to it, thrillerish. And in fact, there's a very cinematic set piece towards the end. I won't say any spoilers, but there's a crop field, and it's just beautiful. And I can certainly see Neon pushing this for awards consideration.
They're going to,
absolutely. But like we've said, I don't think James Gray has ever been the kind of filmmaker that kind of sticks the landing for the Academy, because I think his films, require a sort of cerebral approach that goes beyond, okay, what's happening on a story level, but just the filmmaking, the layers of filmmaking happening here. That's what I'm responding to most.
Okay, so
do you get what I'm saying? So I think,
absolutely get what you're saying.
So I think that that's very much still an aspect to this film,
right,
that I think stands to be possibly a handicap to it being embraced into a top 10 best picture, or even above the line in general.
Right. Okay, so let's have the conversation. Okay, to me, there is just a James Gray problem. I don't think this is the film that fixes it. I can't wait to see the film. I think he's a brilliant filmmaker. But okay, so focus features: Armageddon Time, Jessica Chastain, Anthony Hopkins, Anne Hathaway.
Yeah.
The recently nominated Jeremy Strong. Right. You have Brad Pitt and Warner Brothers and IMAX, and you have Joaquin Phoenix, you have Marion Cotillard, you have Jeremy Renner, you have Vanessa Redgrave, James Caan. There's just so many wonderful actors and filmmakers that live in the James Gray universe. He's never gotten over the hump.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what James Gray has to do in order to do that, other than possibly betray what makes a James Gray film a James Gray film. But
I would say that what James Gray needs to do is win the Palme d'Or.
Or win the Palme d'Or.
That's what I'm saying. I think that this would be a completely different story if Paper Tiger had ended up winning the Palme d'Or or the Grand Prix.
As is always the case at the Academy.
Or even Best Director.
The Palme d'Or forces the conversation, even though Jafar Panahi is the first example as to why that isn't a sure thing. Or money. An Ad Astra that makes $300 million, like Project Hail Mary, is a different conversation.
Right.
But beyond that, here's the thing. In my opinion, James Gray is stuck in a really nasty limbo spot. He's an outsider of the inside, but he works too big to be a full-time outsider. And here's what I mean by that. Let's split the world of awards and or movie awards or film awards, Oscars, and those kind of accolades. Really those kind of accolades, because it's not like a James Gray film has ever won a big substantial prize from the National Film Critics either. If you split it into, there are the Chris Nolans and Quentin Tarantinos, and then there are the Sean Bakers, right? It's very difficult for, the James Gray films to accomplish what the Sean Baker's films have done throughout the independent circuit, right? Whether it's Red Rocket or Honora or The Florida Project. Why? Look at the films he makes. The Immigrant with the Weinstein Company, Armageddon Time with Focus Features. They're too big.
Yeah.
They're too big, and they're not, I guess I would call it maybe timely enough or touch on a specific issue enough to be embraced by that group. And at the same time, while he's working in this bigger story palette, you know, these period pieces oftentimes, and oftentimes working with like a visual language or a visual vocabulary that's built off quote unquote Hollywood filmmaking, he's also too small and too much of an outsider to be embraced by that same Hollywood system, if that makes sense. You know, I think Armageddon Time and The Immigrant are films, We Own the Night, are films that live a little bit more appropriately in quote unquote the Hollywood machine, right? These bigger films. But his point of view keeps them from being embraced as truly Hollywood films. They're almost like, okay, how about this? They're anti-Hollywood films, but they're not really what the independent film community goes for. Just because they're anti-Hollywood does not make them independent films.
Exactly.
You know, the little indies that could doesn't make them the Little Miss Sunshines, Junos, Real Pain. It doesn't make them that. They're just anti-Hollywood films. And so it's really tough for either community to get behind the film and push it over the hump.
Right. I agree. 100%.
And so, like I said, until he makes a film that forgets about being an anti-Hollywood film and is just an independent film, or he just makes a Hollywood film, it's going to be difficult for him to find a place in the conversation, or any of his collaborators to find a place in the conversation.
Right.
You know,
100%. I agree. I want to talk a little bit about the performances, because clearly there's three that, occupy the bulk of the film. But I also think that their placement within the awards stratosphere is a little bit more different, a little different than what people have been saying. I want to say that Adam Driver stands out. I think I heard a few of my colleagues compare him it's a very Robert De Niro-esque. And I think that's certainly true.
Really?
There's a spirit there that I think is prevalent enough to make that comparison, and I think might be appealing enough to some actors. But he straddles this line between not really being supporting, but not really being lead either.
It's a tricky spot.
It's a tricky spot, as exactly. I want to say that Miles Teller, for me, did a pretty good job, and it was convincing enough. But I did think he was a little miscast in the sense that he's
interesting.
That he's I thought he was being portrayed to be, it was a part that I think belonged to an older actor. And I think you could feel that. And I think they do an admirable job of still kind of making sense of Miles Teller in this part. But to me, I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was a miscast happening there, because it should have been an older actor playing that character. And instead, it's sort of like Miles Teller kind of playing an older actor or an older character. So I'm not sure that I see a huge traction for him to make it at the end. Again, I questioned Adam Driver as well. But Scarlett Johansson is interesting in the sense that she has a meatier part than you would think.
Wow, I did not. I haven't heard very much of this.
Right. I don't want to say that I think she's a slam dunk either. But I want to say that it's meatier than I thought, and I could see a scenario where in a weak Best Supporting Actress field, she kind of surfaces as a contender that's mentioned in order to, sort of replace a number 4, number 5 that's lacking somewhere, and her name gets put in there. I'm not saying that that's enough to make it to the end. We all know
especially
that that's
for a James Gray
right.
film.
That's difficult, but it's interesting in that it places her in, I think, a more valuable position than you would think coming into this movie. She's not a predominant figure for the foreground trauma, foreground plot that's happening, but she has enough meat with what happens to her character that I could see a supporting actress push, because she's absolutely supporting, landing her in, let's say, a precursor to where they're, struggling to find these names to fill out a slot of, a slate of 5 or 6 or whatever. Yeah. So that's something that's interesting to consider. Do I think that any of the actors make it at the end? I would say right now, my impression is that they don't. And it's more, if it's embraced, if it's a film that's embraced, it's embraced, for James Gray. But even saying that is kind of difficult, because I'm not sure I'd see it in director right now, making the final 5. maybe a place that could possibly land is somewhere like screenplay. But as I just mentioned, screenplay is an odd category for James Gray because I think his films are not screenplay forward. So it's a tricky film to place without a Palme d'Or win.
We'll have to see what happens. And
in the Oscar conversation.
Part of the problem here is that Neon is stacked, and Neon has a lot of responsibilities in terms of films to campaign. And I'm not sure how high Paper Tiger is going to be on their list. I think it's higher in their list in terms of maybe we can make some money back, but I don't think they're going to prioritize it, especially with its lack of mention at the Cannes. And again, you know, your jury does include Park Chan-wook and Chloe Zhao and Ruth Negga, and the fact that Adam Driver and the film just didn't place, again, is possibly also just that idea that these tastemakers, industry insiders, Oscar insiders, people who vote for Oscars, they're just not that impressed with the film. Or maybe they feel the film doesn't need that much of a spotlight. It's maybe not unique enough for them, whatever the case may be. I do think it's going to be a film that struggles. I can't wait to see it.
I also want to just mention a quick shout out to the cinematographer, Joaquin Baca-Asay, who, you know, worked with James Gray and We Own the Night and Two Lovers. But, you know, interestingly enough, did not work on...
Yeah, he's been working with Darius, I think, for a little while.
Right. But I thought that it was beautifully lensed. I thought the cinematography was gorgeous.
Wow.
I think he did a wonderful job. And so I'd love to see some love for that. Doubtful, because James Gray films, again, don't factor in above or below. But beautiful cinematography.
Not surprising knowing that James Gray is such a visual filmmaker. Now, I do, before we move on to the next one I want to talk about, I do want to mention just up to this point, because I think you brought it up, but I think we should, you know, crystallize it a little bit more. Acting, performances, we've been on a pretty big upside recently. 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025. Cannes performances have figured into the acting races, and specifically into races like actor and actress. And you look at someone like Sebastian Stan, who was able to get in for The Apprentice. So Nora, of course, ended up winning. We haven't really talked about performances yet. Are we going to see a break from that trend? I believe the last time that happened was in 2021, but we've been on a pretty healthy streak of seeing Cannes performances get into acting races. And certainly, I think, as you said, a lot of that has to do with the base of the Oscars growing more internationally. So up to now, are you seeing any performances possibly figure? I mean, I think there's one more movie. We'll talk about it next if you want. Is there any chance a performance can break in so far from the films we've talked about? Or are we thinking that we're going to go back to 2021 where no Cannes performance got into actor, actress, supporting actress?
Well, on that note, I think we can talk about that other film that you were mentioning, and that is Ira Sachs's The Man I Love. We're big fans of Ira Sachs. He's a brilliant filmmaker. He's one of our most sensitive filmmakers, an incredible artist. And I do think that Rami Malek has a very good outing in this film. You know, I certainly have my very strong thoughts about Bohemian Rhapsody and his performance in that, but I think this is one of his best performances. I think it's nuanced. I think it's dimensional. He is playing a real life figure in this film. Jimmy George, who was a celebrated theater actor, who was dying of AIDS during the 1980s New York City scene, and sort of his, you know, I don't want to say final days, but certainly the final chapter of his life while he's preparing for his final show, his final major role. And there isn't a lot of attention being placed. Again, I was fortunate enough to see this film. I was at the premiere. Rami Malek was there. Ira Sachs was there. It was very lovely. It had a very enthusiastic response from the crowd. Like I said, a lot of jury members showed up. I know Demi Moore was there. Ruth Negga was there. So I think it was high on people's list. And it had a very enthusiastic response. I thought the film was quite lovely. And in very Ira Sachs fashion, you know, it's very particular. It's very precise. It's very nuanced. It's very subdued, but still very compelling and very powerful. And still feels like a slice of life kind of docudrama in a way. Very compelling. And so I do think that Rami Malek has enough here to be pushed in the Best Actor arena. You and I have talked about previously how Academy members, if given the opportunity, they like to cite their Academy Award winners frequently at least once more.
Repeat them
if they can, to sort of like justify their, their giving of the trophy to them.
Right.
And I think that Rami Malek has a good chance here. I do think he's playing another gay figure, which I don't know if that could be a detriment to them in the sense that they might feel like, seen that already. But I think we're seeing a very different kind of gay man in this film than we saw in Bohemian Rhapsody.
Right.
And so, I wouldn't discount that. And I think that of the options that we have, he's one of the biggest ones that could stand to make a final five. I don't think he would win for this film, but I think he could certainly squeak into a final five with this film under the right push. Right now, the film doesn't have distribution.
Right. I was going to say that there's no buyer for the film yet. Ira Sachs, famously, again, we're talking about James Gray, has never actually made a dent with the Academy, despite having really critically acclaimed performances. I think of something like, for example, Love is Strange, which I think is a wonderful film back in 2014. You had Alfred Molina in that, and John Lithgow, still no performances. So again, back to that idea, is this really going to be the film that brings Ira Sachs into an Oscar contention, the Ira Sachs film that gets into Oscar contention? Is it too soon for Rami Malek? There's no category shift, which isn't always great. It's true. It hasn't been 10 years since Bohemian Rhapsody. Who knows?
But it has been a sizable amount.
It's been a sizable amount.
It's been at least 7, hasn't there?
Maybe I think about the 10-year wait between Charlize Theron and North Country, and not even 10 years, more than that, really. More than that.
Oh, huge. Bombshell.
I meant the 10-year wait between Reese Witherspoon for Walk the Line and her win, and Wild, right? It's about 9 years, I think. So he's close, but not exactly at the 10-year mark. It's a very different performance, but again, is that the kind of thing that they would go for anyway? He did not win, obviously, at Cannes, which we kind of figured wouldn't happen because the film is just too American friendly. Just they don't like giving awards to American films.
Well, I thought he had a good chance of winning. I was wrong. Yeah.
I did not think that was going to happen. But again, I do like the real life figure part that you're bringing up. That could be an interesting element into the campaign. I think a lot of it's going to depend on who buys it, how they focus on it, and how busy this category is, because it traditionally is a very busy category. But so you're thinking that maybe that would be the performance, if any, that breaks through, and if not, we're looking at a 2021 no Cannes performance.
Right now, that's what I'm seeing. And I don't think that he has a bad shot. Like we said, I know last year Ira Sachs had another very celebrated film in Peter Hujar's Day, which didn't really go anywhere, and had a very celebrated turn by Ben Whishaw. And again, it was just too quietly released by Janus. So I think a lot of it depends on who's backing the film. Yeah. But is there enough there to land the 5? I do think there is.
And what about the idea of him? Because it sounds like it would be a solo. And there's nothing worse than being by yourself.
I agree. I think that the film's best shot, period, is Best Actor nomination.
Yeah, and that's already a flaw of the campaign, technically. There's nothing worse than that.
Right.
Okay, the next film I want to jump to, which...
Even though, again, it's very well performed down the line.
Oh, yeah.
Among them, Tom Sturridge, who plays his supportive boyfriend, and especially sort of a breakout moment for the actor Luther Ford, who plays his new lover in the film. I don't think he has a huge filmography. They certainly presented him at the event, at the premiere, as kind of a new face and a breakout role. And I did think it was a breakout role for him. He did a wonderful job.
Well, jumping from there, again, we may very well be seeing no Cannes performance go into the final 5 for any of the actings. I think it's also interesting, when we talk about these Cannes performances that do break in, they're usually not by themselves, and a lot of them are foreign language, and Rami Malek's actually in English. So that's kind of interesting to think about, because, the big effect here is that international body, but it'll be interesting to see if, again, and we'll talk about this, as the season progresses, if there are not a lot of international performances for the international voting base of the Oscars to promote from Cannes into a nomination, will they go looking elsewhere? And this is where the Rosa conversation happens, right? When you say that there is no strong actress coming out of Cannes to factor into Best Actress, is this when you start thinking about, well, Sandra Hüller was amazing in the Berlinale film, Rosa. Yeah. So We'll talk about this later, but that's something to keep an eye on. Next film I want to talk about that walked away with nothing, even though, again, this was another film that premiered somewhat early. And when it premiered, people were very excited about it. And it was the talk of the town.
It was a huge talking point on the ground. It was a huge talking point.
I think, can we call it the most debatable movie, the most debated movie of the fest?
Yeah, maybe.
Can we do that? Okay. And we're talking about the South Korean film, Hope by Na Hung Jin. Maybe some listeners know him from his previous work, The Wailing, which is also a big hit at Cannes, but he's actually never been in competition in Cannes.
Right.
This film famously is coming into the festival with the biggest price tag, I believe, for a South Korean film ever.
Yeah.
And I think it's only 55 million, but there you go. It's the biggest price tag for a South Korean film. He had Park Chan-wook as the jury president, and there was this maybe idea that this film would be looked upon favorably by this jury for a lot of reasons. I was able to see it.
I was not able to see it.
You were not able to see it.
I was unfortunate. Again, we'll talk about this. It was very much talked about, and you had a very polarized reaction. I think what I kept hearing was batshit crazy. And some people saying it was batshit crazy and I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And then other people saying it was batshit crazy and comparing it to Megalopolis.
Yeah.
Which was insane for me to hear. The diverse opinions.
Right.
And I also remember it was certainly a memorable piece. A lot of people talked about it, but I know a lot of people said that the first 40 minutes are incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the film takes a turn and it becomes an onslaught,
right,
of, I guess CGI and set pieces and action. A lot of people commenting on, the sort of mainstream blockbusterism of it all,
right,
kind of made it a weird choice to be in the Cannes competition lineup.
Right. But
then there are other people who thought it was brilliant.
Right.
It was interesting to see the array of reactions, and it made me feel sorry that I missed it. I felt like it was an important film to watch.
It was an important film to watch, I think, in terms of just being involved in the conversation, which was no matter which way you slice it, hate it or love it, it was fun, I think, to have the conversation. And so South Korea's biggest movie, Na Hung Jin has developed a substantial fan base with his work, finally getting into Cannes competition. This is coming in with Neon, which I also think is important to remember. At one point, again, people were saying that it's so debated that it's the kind of film that could graduate into a major win. Obviously, it didn't win anything, but think about it in the sense where people are so impressed by what they're seeing on the screen. At the same time, it's kind of a mess. So it's not unlike Emilia Perez, which actually did end up winning awards. Messy films at Cannes can still win, and you can sort of say, I bless this mess. It's great. And there's an element here where, the conversation could also be this is a very inappropriate movie for competition because there's nothing like it. It is a 100% blockbuster, box office, dare I say, popcorn film, summer flick. That's what it is. That has incredible ingenuity and incredible precision and calibration from its filmmaker. And I think there's actually this interesting conversation that's going on with its sort of form about, where it can sort of sit artistically. And we had to talk about this in the sense of what's fascinating about this movie is that it's a movie that should be out of competition, but it's in competition. It's the most blockbustery of the films in competition. Dare I say that you could possibly find a subversive commentary on blockbusters, within the film. This filmmaker has done a better job on this film than a lot of other filmmakers, claim to be able to do here in the US. And so I sort of told you after seeing it, and the debate was raging. This is the only film I think on the list that if you play your cards right, it will break $50 million at the box office and the US.
Interesting.
At the US. I think it's the film that could be a runaway success at the US box office. And I told you, get ready. This is going to be Neon's most successful film. And I've told that to this year. That's most money-making film this year. And I told that to a lot of colleagues that were in the festival that had issues with the film. And I'd say, what's going to be worse is that you hated the film and that people in America are going to talk the crap out of it.
What they say.
And they were suffering through the idea of it. But I think that's an important thing here, and not unlike the Bola Negra, this is a film that it did not win an award. The Palme d'Or, I think, would have solidified it as a top 5 movie. But this is the kind of film that played in Cannes. It does not need an award. What it needs is money.
Money.
And I think it's very well positioned to get that money in the US. I think it's very well positioned to make that money back. The filmmaker has announced that, he has a whole plan for this movie. I don't know if it's a sequel or a trilogy or whatever. But it's sort of a movie that sort of exemplifies that you no longer have to go to the US to make IP. You no longer have to go to the US to make a muscular, assertive American blockbuster. You can actually do that in another country.
Yeah.
And again, I would argue that you can do it just as good, possibly even better. And I do think that there are going to be some filmmakers who find an artistic statement in it. This has the participation of, industry mainstays like Alicia Vikander, Michael Fassbender, Taylor Russell. But you also
do they have sizable parts?
They do not have sizable parts, but they have incredibly interesting parts in the way that they're used. And I can't say anything more on that because you haven't seen the film. But someone who does have a very important part is the young breakthrough actress from Squid Game.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Young Hoi Yun has a very prominent role in the film. There's an element of the film that's, how can I say it? You can sort of see, I think, someone like Steven Spielberg loving this film. There's such inspiration for this film behind films like Jaws, these big, meaty blockbusters that people used to sort of loved for, the genius way they were calibrated. People talk about the 40-minute sequence. There is something incredibly masterful about it.
It's a 40-minute sequence?
It's kind of like a 40-minute sequence.
Wow.
There's something incredibly masterful about it. There's also something incredibly excessive about it. But you can see, again, fans of popcorn films in the US going absolutely gaga for it. I think the big hiccup that I've already seen that's giving me pause is Neon is releasing this in September. I'm not sure how I feel about that. In South Korea, it's coming out in the summer. And I think that this is, again, a perfect summer movie. And I think, after everything we said about Fjord, there's an element about this film where as soon as it becomes a breakthrough box office hit, this is the film that Neon is going to campaign, and they will campaign it successfully. This is a film that I think could hit, best cinematography. It's a cinematographer from Parasite. It's a cinematographer from Snowpiercer. Right. They do an amazing job. It could hit editing. It could hit sound. The score is amazing.
Really?
By Michael Abels, who people will know from Nope and Jordan, and working with Jordan Peele. There's a stunt category this year. It can hit stunt. People have totally, fried the visual effects of the movie. And there will be, it will not make visual effects, but I will also say I don't think it's that bad. And I don't think bad. I honestly think here's my take is, if after watching the film you're so stuck on the visual effects, then the film didn't work.
Right.
Because the film is doing so many things outside of that, right? Where if that completely takes you out, then it was just an unsuccessful film for you. For me, I can't say it's the star of the film, and I can't say it's a particularly good element of the film, but I can't say it took away from everything else that I thought the film was doing, right? And again, I'm not someone who thinks the film is a masterpiece or immaculate. I just think it's a film that sort of is interesting because, again, it has taken away the spotlight of what the American cinema can do. Like I said, if it makes those box office dollars, people in America will be crapping their pants in terms of working in the industry because they've just lost the thread and they've lost the audience. But so it is a film that I think, again, not unlike we were saying for La Bola Negra, this is like La Bola Negra, this is the second film, in my opinion, that can actually hit below the line all over the place. Now, one place that I think I'm afraid it will not hit is international film, where it is just too much of an American blockbuster to actually figure there, right? But it could figure in all the other below the line categories that I've mentioned. And I think there's a recipe for success there if Neon knows how to launch that and some money into a Best Picture consideration. And I think there will also be some filmmakers who, again, in that director's branch, who really they see the inspiration from, Spielberg, for example, and are going to be big fans of this filmmaker. And again, it sort of announces the filmmaker as he will be co-opted by Hollywood within the next few years. Sort of the same way that Bong Joon-ho was sort of brought in to, make Snowpiercer, for example. So watch out for that. It didn't win anything, but the big telltale sign here will be how much money does it make? Granted, I think Neon has already made a huge ass hiccup because they're releasing it in September. And when does everyone stop going to the movies? September. And when does everyone go to the movies?
But it might also be a moment to dominate the conversation in September because there's so few films dominating the conversation at that time. It could be.
I guess you're right.
If you think about it, September was really the month that solidified Weapons because it came out in late August and rolled into September, and they sort of owned September in a way.
Right.
So I feel like a film like this owning a month in the American industry is a big deal.
And I will say this, I would actually love it if they moved it up a couple of weeks and they made it the end of August. I would actually, I like what you said about Weapons. It's an unconventional movie, but people embraced it as like the last summer blockbuster. I also want to say, I think we're going to have an episode later this season. We're going to talk about the summer. It's a very important month for making money for the industry, but also ends up being a very important month for Oscars. We already have some blockbusters in major consideration, and we have others coming out. If ever there was a moment to be considering these large popcorn movies, these movies that get an audience into a theater, if ever there was a time to be taking them seriously for Oscar contention, now would be that time. So if this film manages to do that, do not be shocked. And the debate will rage on, and it'll sort of be, again, like an Emilia Perez, where people will absolutely hate the film, and it'll be a strong contender to be nominated for a bunch of things. So we'll see what happens. I think Neon has already made a hiccup, but it's possible, as you said, that again, September, people have enough money to go to the movies again. But man, do I wish they would have released it like in July or August, because I really do feel they would have found an audience for it.
Right.
All right. So then jumping from there, I just want to touch upon a couple of films that did manage to win an award. We saw some of them, but I think our opinion is they're not going to be huge factors. I think let's start with Coward, which you saw.
Right. I saw Coward I saw Coward at the premiere. I was fortunate enough to be there, and it did have a very enthusiastic response from the crowd. A lot of young people attended the screening, and I felt like a lot of the younger crowd was very, very receptive to the piece. This is, I believe, Lucas Dant's third feature film. His first film, Girl. Yeah. Kind of was a big talking point in Cannes when it premiered, I believe, in a side section. And then his second film, Close, ended up winning the Grand Prix.
Getting his first Oscar nomination.
And it landed an Oscar nomination for Best Foreign Language Film.
Working with A24.
Yeah, worked with A24. It's that film in particular I have some issues with. And this latest film ended up winning the Best Actor prize for the two actors that take center stage in the film. The film is taking place during World War I.
Period piece.
Yeah, they're both playing soldiers in the Belgian front during the trench warfare. And there's an attraction that happens, but one of the soldiers is there's a group of soldiers who are relegated to being kind of entertainment for the other troops. And there's one that's very involved in, kind of putting on plays and sort of a theatrical aspect, just providing relief and entertainment to the other soldiers. And so this the main character of the piece, Pierre, I believe the character's name, it's sort of his way of falling in love, not just with this other soldier, but also this sort of artistic movement. I think the film is, having a conversation about, in the midst of all this bloodshed and warfare and cruelty, using the arts as not just an escape, but a way of finding, humanity and purpose. I don't think the film landed too well for me personally. I think it's a little bit sentimental. I think a lot of the reception from critics has been, in the same vicinity. But I do think in terms of, the crowd itself, it was enthusiastically responded to. And both actors, the actor who plays Pierre and the actor who plays Francis, who's sort of the leader of this, group of soldiers that is putting on these shows. They both ended up winning the Best Actor prize, which is interesting because we were predicting winners, and for some reason I didn't think of, them giving a two-way prize to the two actors of this film. But it makes sense. Their emotional turns from both actors. And
kind of interesting because there's no Rami Malek in the win, but they still went for like a queer film.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
And it's sort of interesting also because I'm not sure they've ever had shared wins before for both acting categories.
Right.
So that's kind of interesting too. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So again, I think the film has a timeliness in finding artistry and beauty, to kind of counter war and omnipresent misery. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I don't think that the film made enough of a splash to transcend into an Oscar nomination.
Right.
I don't think the film is going to land in the best foreign language film category. I don't think Lucas Dont will have the success with this film that he had with Close. So that's where we're at with that.
Worth mentioning that Mubi did pick this up during the festival, so it will be released here. Jumping from there into the two final winners, one of them was the jury prize winner for a film that a lot of people controversially were getting heat for because they complained about the film coming too late, and a lot of people just didn't attend. And then there was a whole controversy on film Twitter about calling out those critics and press members who didn't take the film very seriously. And the film is The Dreamed Adventure. I think the final film that premiered, it did win the jury prize,
yeah.
Right? And it was picked up by Janice just a little while ago, right?
And I think it's from Bulgaria, I believe.
Yeah. And so that's sort of interesting to see that film pick up a win. And then the last one to mention is...
We missed The Dreamed Adventure.
Didn't get a chance to watch it. And then the last film is A Man of His Time, which ended up getting the screenplay win.
The screenplay win. Yeah, unfortunately, we missed that film as well. But I know that the director is the co-director of a film that I saw a couple years ago, Zero Fucks Given, with Adele Zarkopoulos, which I was a big fan of. I believe he directed that film with his partner, I believe. And this is a solo outing for him, his first time in competition, and it did win the screenplay prize, which I think is no small thing.
Yeah, which is great. Still has not been picked up. Let's quickly just conclude our competition talk by talking about a few misses or just mentioning them. Almodovar was there with Bitter Christmas. Sony Picture Classics is going to release that.
I did get a chance to see that, yes.
Yeah, what'd you think?
I think that it's, most people consider it to be a sort of minor Almodovar work.
That's what it seemed like.
I didn't think it was his strongest work, but still, as always, there's always a joy to be found in an Almodovar film and artistry. So that's still true of this film, but certainly a more minor work. Yeah.
A lot of people were unpleased or displeased with Asghar Farhadi's new film with Isabelle Huppert, Parallel Tales. A lot of people did not like it after its premiere.
I think it's a take on the Decalogue, I believe.
I think a lot that already pissed off a lot of people. The Beloved from Rodrigo Sorogoyen.
I actually heard good things about that one.
Did hear good things about it on the ground. And maybe some people were considering Javier Bardem, but it did not happen. Javier Bardem already has a win, I believe, for Beautiful. Moulin from Laszlo Nemes. Didn't do that great. Some people, again, were talking about it for Best Actor. Neon, of course, has to pick up a lot of movies in order for it to have the best odds at winning the big prizes. Again, the machine of Neon is ridiculous when you get down there. But they had one of the couple of the most poorly received films maybe on the festival. One of them was Sheep in the Box, which was tough to find a person who enjoyed it.
Really?
Yes.
I mean, I didn't hear much about it, but I know that I was very sorry to have missed it because we're big fans of Hirokazu Koreeda.
And Japan, again, Country of Honor. But
and I did get a chance to see The Unknown. Which is the other... Neon is doing that?
Neon's on that as well, yeah.
Which is, I think, directed by the
Arthur Harari,
co-writer, I believe, of Anatomy of a Fall.
Yep.
Stars Lea Seydoux. I was not a fan of this film, but you do find...
a lot of people were not.
Yeah, but you did find corners in the festival who saw it as a very powerful piece of art. I know David Ehrlich was a big fan. Knowing
Neon, that will get the what's it called? That will get the alpha treatment and come out nowhere.
But it certainly makes me wonder, like, did I miss something? Did I? But it certainly the crowd I saw with felt we're on the same page. I didn't feel it was a very enthusiastic response.
A lot of people I spoke to felt the same way, but that brings us to the other Lea Seydoux movie,
Right.
Gentle Monster, which was one of the few films that was also acquired by Netflix.
Right.
And they supposedly said Best Actress, maybe?
Right. I was fortunate enough to see that film and attend the premiere with Lea Seydoux there, and it was a cool experience. Catherine Deneuve was there. You know, I thought it was a bit surprising to have Netflix nab the the U.S. rights for it, but I do think that if you see the film, it kind of makes sense, because I think given what the film is about, and it deals with this marriage that begins to fall apart because the husband gets accused of pedophilia, it's kind of the thing that you could see a group of people on Netflix tuning into and then kind of being absorbed by the sort of headliney-ness of it all to stay and watch it. I'm a big fan of the director of this film, Marie Kreutzer. Her last film was Adored Corsage, but I do think this is a step down.
Also submitted for
foreign
language
Right.
film, shortlisted, and Vicky Creeps got some mentions for actors.
Right. I do think this was a step down from Corsage. Unfortunately, I was not a big fan of it. I think a lot of the colleagues that I spoke to felt of a similar, felt similarly.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised it got picked up at the end. I think a lot of people were. But now jumping to another section where I think there is some meat to talk about. I want to talk about On Certain Regard. And I want to talk about what the big movie that premiered there, the big opening night film, which you had a chance to see. I know a lot of listeners are going to be excited about it. I'm excited to see it. You have thoughts. I want to talk about Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. And that is being brought to us by Mubi. Jane Schoenbrunn, their previous film, I Saw the TV Glow, was repped by A24. A couple of things here. Plan B is on this Schoenbrunn film. First time I believe they're working together. So Didi Gardner, Jeremy Kleiner, producers on it. Word on the street was very optimistic and very high on the film. Has prompted some people to think of it as maybe an awards contender. I want your thoughts on that. But I also want to say that it did win the Queer Palm.
Right. I was fortunate enough to see it at the premiere. I have certain thoughts about this film. I'm a big fan of Jane Schoenbrunn. I loved their We're All Going to the World's Fair. I was a fan of I Saw the TV Glow as well.
This is their third film.
And I do think it's their weakest film of the three. And the film is, in a way, there's something very Hitchcockian about it, because it's really dissecting the intersection between, death and slasher films and sexuality. And there's also a very kind of thought-provoking discussion on identity and gender, which is prevalent in all their films, Jane Schoenbrunn's films. But it felt like the film felt like the beginning of these thesis arguments, as opposed to a full completed thesis. So it's almost the very beginnings of these thesis elements, and not the full embodiment or accomplishment of this argument. And I felt that, honestly, a lot of the people that I talked to felt a very similar way. They were mixed on the film.
Critics were very high on it.
That's the thing that I want. That's the dichotomy I'm pointing out. I think it was rapturously received by critics, but on the ground, it felt a little bit different. I know that I talked to several people who thought either they really didn't like it or they were very mixed about it.
Right.
And as someone who's a big fan of Jane Schoenbrunn's work, I did think it was their weakest outing yet.
Right. I feel like I did speak to colleagues and people who had a similar, not unlike their feelings for Paweł Pawlikowski's film Fatherland. Very good Jane Schoenbrunn film, not my favorite Jane Schoenbrunn film.
And I will say that I think the film's themes and aesthetic, I think, make it so that I think it's going to be less of a success financially than I Saw the TV Glow. I don't expect it to be the runaway hit that film was. I could be wrong, but I think there's they're playing with the form and the structure in a way that I think is going to be a little heady for some people, for some mainstream audiences or audiences. certainly their fans are going to show up and watch the film. That's of course, but the sort of crossover appeal, I see it less happening for this film,
Right.
for teenage sex. I will say that the film ends really well, and I thought that the ending was very powerful and very powerfully done, and it really, it really stuck the landing. Let's say that. But in general, I don't think I see the same kind of celebration amongst general audiences that I saw for I Saw a TV Glow.
A couple of things I want to point out based on what you said. Number one, teenage sex coming from movie, right, does not have the fandom that A24 had, which probably fed into the success of I Saw a TV Glow coming out in the summer. So it seems like you don't think it's going to make as much money or be as big a success as I Saw a TV Glow. Could be interesting. The A24 factor is missing. Tell me a little bit about Gillian Anderson. There are some people who were very hyped about her performance in the film or her participation in Jane's film. So what can we have to look forward there?
Well, I think both performances from Gillian Anderson and from Hannah Einbinder are good, are strong, but I don't think they'll factor into the awards race at all. I think, there's a certain campiness possibly to the Gillian Anderson sort of character that she's playing. This sort of elder, wise sort of final girl, who I think thematically is a cornerstone of the film. But I don't see either performance making it too far in the awards conversation.
I think one thing that people sort of stuck to at the very end of the festival is the idea that you had these two bigger queer films, because they came out the same night, these two bigger queer films in competition come out with enthusiasm from both crowds, La Bola Negra and Coward, towards the end of the festival. Some of them, one of them at least, getting big Palme d'Or talk, La Bola Negra, but both of them lose the queer palm to Jane's film, Teenage Sex and Death. Maybe that is also giving people a heightened sense of, hey, maybe this film is a contender. Plan B. Can Plan B work any magic on this film?
This is very outside of their comfort zone for the Academy, so I don't see this film factoring into Oscar awards conversation at all. And I think that might be further cemented if it doesn't do well financially, which I don't expect it to do too well financially.
Without the A24 factor.
Well, not so much because of A24, even though I think that's important. It's more about, the piece itself. It's very meta, it's very heady, and I just don't see the same kind of crossover appeal.
You think maybe some American audiences are going to go in there, expecting a slasher film and not getting that?
Possibly, but even some of the fans or viewers that might be on the wavelength of Jane Schoenbrun's and their work, I think that they might find, that it's less accessible in a way than their previous work. So I don't see that. I'm not sure I see it at all for awards consideration.
Okay. I think the next film we have to talk about is I would call a massive breakout hit at the Cannes Film Festival. And you had a chance to see it. I did not, so I'd really like your thoughts on it. I think listeners can use some clarity on it. That film is Club Kid, which is a debut film from Jordan Firstman, I believe. This was one of the few films, maybe one of the only films, the first film, I think, to start a bidding war, followed shortly after by La Bola Negra. Bidding war between A24, Netflix, Mubi, and Searchlight Pictures. This was, supposedly what was going on. And A24 would end up buying the film supposedly for $17 million. This is, I believe, the only big acquisition that A24 made. In fact, it may be the only acquisition that A24 made. A24, not a staple in Cannes like Neon, but certainly has been participating more and more frequently. This year, that was not the case, but they pick up possibly the hottest title to premiere here. I also want to mention, the debut feature. What are your thoughts on this? English language film, Uncertain Regard. What are you thinking here?
Well, it was a big hit at the festival. A lot of people were talking about it. Jordan Firstman first was on our radar after he was involved in Rotting in the Sun, which is a film that we really loved in 2023. Learning more about him, I think he was more of a sort of internet personality. Most people might remember him recently from being in the Rachel Sennett show I Love LA. And this is his debut film.
Which he's also the star in.
He's the star, and he also wrote as well. And I will say that I quite enjoyed it. You know, there's a part of me that was skeptical, but I did have a really good time. It's just really accessible, very fun, and ultimately quite poignant. More poignant than you would think going into the film. I think most people responded very well in the screening that I was at. And it was a very enjoyable time, and charming and sweet, and still has the sort of, if you're familiar with Jordan Firstman's brand of humor, that's all over the piece. And I think it was a very successful outing. It certainly made a lot of headlines. And I expect it to be a moderate hit when it comes out. I'm not sure yet. I see it as a, again, I could be wrong, but a runaway breaking the bank hit. But certainly the ingredients are there for it to do really well theatrically.
Here's what called my attention. Beyond it being the only acquisition that A24 made, and it made it for a pretty handsome price, this was something that Searchlight was supposedly considering. And Searchlight very very specific about the kind of films that they're going to pick up now. But so I think there's possibly some broad appeal to this film. You tell me. As far as I know, it's not dated yet. And so I think you and I had a conversation, for example, of last year, when A24 picked up something like Pillion, and it also being a film that you enjoyed a lot, and a film that you would think is easy to find an audience for, or an audience exists for. Obviously, Pillion, I don't think A24 did a very good job on it.
Right.
It was sort of in this in-between place between they campaigned it, air quotes, campaigned it for awards for last year, but it didn't really hit American theaters till February. I think they were trying to do some counter programming with Valentine's Day. I don't think it worked out. And so is the release date going to be a factor here? Is this like kind of the film where it can be nurtured into finding an audience, and from finding an audience, you can maybe launch a viable campaign off that? I also want to mention a sort of comparison people are throwing out here a lot, which is last year's Ava Victor and A24 and Sorry Baby, being a sort of a debut film that after Sundance, certainly people didn't show up to watch in the theaters, but had a lot of critical acclaim, made it all the way to a Golden Globe nomination for Ava Victor, Writers Guild nomination. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something that's on the table? Can it grow and be molded to a bigger, better campaign? Contender? Is the release date going to factor? And what about Alex Coco?
So I'm not sure that I fully know when the optimal time to release the film would be, but I do think that whenever it's released, I do think it stands to do well commercially. I can see it being a summer film. I can see it being a fall film. Maybe I see it less being a winter film. But I think that in whichever window they show the film, it'll do well. I do think that comparisons to the Ava Victor and Sorry Baby, I think, are a little bit off base. I like the comparison with Pillion, in that I thought that was a very accessible sort of, charming and subversively charming in a way because of the Dom culture. A film that was poised to, I think, break out more than it did. And the release strategy, fucked it up a little bit. But I do think there's something very accessible about this movie. And I think there's something a little bit less accessible about Sorry Baby. I think, that film has...
Accessible or commercial?
Maybe commercial. Commercial might be better. But I think that film, it's a more quaint, more, I don't want to say slice of life, but it's a more intimate, quaint, smaller film, and this feels a little bit more built for a mass audience, especially a queer audience. I think that they would definitely a queer audience, a young audience, of an audience that's receptive to good critical reception, as I think this film definitely has. I think you have a lot of elements coming together to have crossover appeal whenever the release is set for whichever window it chooses, and that it's not a quiet film at all like Ava Victor's film is. It's a louder film. It's a shinier film. It's a glittery film, but it's also, like I said, it's charming. It's sweet. Like Pillion, you could get an audience member who might not necessarily be very familiar with that world, and they'll like the film. I think Ava Victor's film is more specific in terms of the audience that responded to it. I think this has the crossover appeal to respond to a large group. In fact, the screening I saw, there was a wide range of different people at that screening, and they all seemed to very much like it.
Enjoy.
Exactly. And I do think that Alex Coco being a producer is certainly something to pay attention to.
He won an Oscar for
Anora. But think about this film being sort of in the universe of Anora in a way. It certainly doesn't have the political and social-political relevancy and detail and urgency that Anora had. Case in point, that's why it's a film that's playing in uncertain regard and isn't in competition. There's a commerciality to this film that I think Anora sort of issues. And Anora is very much, sort of an artistic endeavor in a way that this, I think, is a little bit more commercially driven, but just well done, commercially driven, poignant work. So I don't see this factoring in the same vicinity as Anora. I don't see it factoring into Best Picture nomination. As you said, money changes everything. So if it completely, obliterates the box office, then it's a completely different conversation. But I also want to say how many queer films are breaking the box office to such a degree.
That's an interesting point.
Lamentably so. And so I wonder, if a film like this, the opening of the gates for a film like this will always be somewhere like screenplay.
Well, can it maybe get, that's one battle that Sorry Baby at the end walked out short of.
And Pillion.
And I would say Pillion was much further.
I will say,
could it maybe?
I think that it can. I think that it can, so long as, again, A24 doesn't fuck up the release like it did with Pillion, because I do think Pillion had a good shot. And I think, again, it's much more primed and ready for crossover appeal, a la, a film like Pillion, than a film like Sorry Baby, which I think has a more specific audience it's geared towards.
Right.
So, yes, I do think that it can land a screenplay nomination, but I don't see it going above that for the Oscars. I do think Jordan Firstman can land a nomination for comedy actor, and the film will have love throughout the season. And it's just a very enjoyable film. It's just, you can't knock it for that. It's a very enjoyable film. It's a fun time. It's a sweet time.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't necessarily expect it to be that, considering what it's about. But yeah.
So it's A24 is probably picked from Cannes. We'll see what happens. I wanna leave this part of the conversation about Club Kid on one note. Again, this is our first episode of the season, season 3, episode 1. We're gonna revisit this topic later, but maybe you can, say a few words about it. But this is going to be a very historical, significant, important year for the industry moving forward, and the Oscars as part of the industry is going to play a hand in that. The breakthrough capacity of the social media star that exists here with Jordan Firstman, right? And is that possibly going to play a factor into this film's success, both at the Oscars, but before that, commercially?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially considering, we're
going to have discussions on this bigger narrative as the season goes on.
I do think that, I agree. I think it's a really good
to look out for.
I think that's a really good point, and I think that's a prevalent thing to be on the watch for. Yeah.
Okay. I want to end our discussion on Uncertain Regard with a film called Every Time, which was directed by Sandra Warner. We did not get a chance to see it.
Unfortunately, I was very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, you really wanted to see it. I wanna mention it because it actually is the winner of the Uncertain Regard section, beating out films like Teenage Sex and Death and Club Kid, which is very popular.
Again, were very popular choices.
Very popular choices. And it did get picked up by 1-2 Special, which has been trying to find a space in the market, commercially with audiences.
They certainly have been
with
trying to find a space
awards.
in Cannes because
Yes.
they've been one of the studios that have been, mainstays or trying
Right.
to be mainstays in the festival.
And they've been buying things from other festivals, but they have not found a winning recipe yet. But I do think it's interesting that every time the winner will be released by them. They got a couple other movies that they bought. I want to jump now to Director's Fortnight. A couple of films that I just think are worth mentioning. And one of them is, of course, a film that Neon, of course, already brought with them. And that is an adaptation of Mrs. Dalloway called Clarissa, starring Oscar nominee
Sofia
Canedo, the great Sofia Canedo.
Yeah.
And this is from a filmmaking pair, a duo of brothers, twin brothers even, I believe, Ari Asiri and Shuko Asiri. I was there opening night. Very enthusiastic crowd for the film. Sofia Canedo is a tremendous actor who can do almost anything.
She was also a big highlight for me when I saw her earlier this year in a film called Mouse.
Yeah, and she's just a great actress.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I feel like the film very handsomely designed, but I don't think fully achieves what it wants to do. I don't think it's the most memorable Dalloway adaptation, but what I do think is it does show two filmmakers who I think are going to continue making some singular work. So I don't think this is the big bet that Neon wanted it to be. The other film I want to talk about actually has not been picked up yet. And one of the few English language films on the director's side was called Atonement.
Director's Fortnight.
Director's Fortnight, yes. Atonement. And this film actually based on a New Yorker article directed by Reed Van Dyke, I believe is his name. And why I bring this up is because they're actually a previous nominee in the live action short category for their short film DeKalb Elementary, which we both saw, which we both thought was fantastic. I think that was 2016, so it's been a while. This is their first film, again, based off a New Yorker article, sort of chronicling an event that happened during the war in Iraq. And Hiam Abbas is in it, and she has a very beautiful role in it, but smaller, an actor that you like a lot.
Boyd Holbrook.
Boyd Holbrook is the lead in it, and he does a fantastic job. And even Kenneth Branagh is in it. And why I bring this up is because although the film hasn't been picked up, it's sort of the film that in other years, had it been picked up by a prominent distributor, a prominent studio, it could have been molded into a potential contender for any of those performances, for all those performances, for possibly, a first-time filmmaker like for Reed. But I think it kind of shows where the industry is, where, an A24 and a Neon, these bigger branded studios, distributors, they're not going to bet on this film. That's going to be tough to find an audience for, because who's going to want to voluntarily go and watch a film about, remorse and regret for our actions in the Iraq War. Who's really going to want to go, and how do you market that, and how do you sell it to an American audience right now that's kind of suffering through so much already, and is finding it difficult to find enough pocket money to go to the movies. So no one has picked it up yet. Other years you could have picked it up and you could have maybe launched a admirable campaign out of it, even if it at the end does not make it to several categories. Hiam Abbas is interesting because we actually saw her in a couple of films in Berlin, so they're having a pretty good year as well. I think this is the kind of film where it would have made a splash 10 years ago, but this just isn't what's moving the needle right now. I think as a filmmaker, especially the ending I thought was very memorable. And so I hope they make another film soon. Jumping from that, I want to talk about a couple of different categories, right? You said you wanted to talk about a couple of films that premiered in a couple of different sections, but could maybe figure into the Oscar race for two different categories, right?
Yeah, I think it was a particularly strong year for documentary films, especially featured on the side sections. So in Director's Fortnight, we had the documentary Once Upon a Time in Harlem that's being released by Neon. Neither of us got a chance to see that, I believe.
Right.
But there's a history behind that film that makes it quite interesting.
Right. So it's chronicling the Harlem Renaissance. William Greaves is actually responsible for directing it. And he's a prominent figure, a documentarian, a black documentarian, that sort of started out as an actor and sort of ended up going his own way and got frustrated with what it was like trying to find work as an actor, especially in film. And so he sort of becomes a documentarian. I think he even goes to school and in Canada and is educated by the National Film Board. And he ends up, some of our listeners are going to recognize the name because the filmmaker responsible for, a film that has acquired a little bit of a cult standing, which is almost impossible to pronounce, excuse me, Symbiocytotoxoplasm, which was, I guess, kind of rediscovered in the aughts by Steven Soderbergh. Steve Buscemi was also a big fan, and so they were kind of responsible for, bringing it out to bigger audiences because it's the kind of film that, never got a mass distribution deal. And so Soderbergh helps the film get more widely distributed. And I think it's even in the Criterion collection now. But so very, very historied filmmaker. And so this is a project they were making, but unfortunately they passed away before the film could be released. And so as far as I know, their son helped finish the film. And so I just think that between the subject matter of the Harlem Renaissance, neon sort of backing it up, and sort of, again, just the interesting place that filmmaker, William Greaves, has sort of in the American film industry, or sort of the life of American film, I think all those are good signs that this is a film that a lot of people are going to want to rush to see and are definitely going to consider for best documentary by the end of the year. So William Greaves not only has that sort of following or sort of admiration for those, I guess we're going to call them experimental avant-garde pieces like Symbio, but also was prominent in sort of recording and documenting a lot of what happened during the civil rights movement. And so I think that this is definitely going to be a player for documentary film.
Another film that I think a lot of people are pegging to be a big player in the documentary film category is Rehearsals for a Revolution, which Sony Picture Classics picked up during the fest. And you did get a chance to see that film. And I know that I heard a lot of wonderful things about it.
I thought it was one of my favorite films of the festival, and it's completely devastating, sort of personal statement on, everything that's happened in Iran. Sony Picture Classics bought it during the fest. Not surprised about that. It's one of those films where the magic is it's so personal and sort of idiosyncratic and subjective, but so expansive at the same time, and sort of manages to become everyone's experience. Synonymous, I think, for everyone's experience of what was going on in Iran at that time. Filmmaker, I think, also was a one-time actor as well. Kind of interestingly, I don't want to spoil the movie, but in a very fascinating way, and also the child of filmmakers. And so there's a similar theme going on there, right? With this sort of this idea of a legacy of a filmmaker coming through in these projects. But it's such a devastating, powerful piece. I feel very confident it'll end up being shortlisted, and I think has a great shot of being nominated. And as I said, it was one of my favorite films of the entire festival, and a completely shattering, unforgettable experience. Tough to watch, but an amazing piece.
Another film that I heard quite a bit about, I think I heard very enthusiastic responses to, was The Match, which premiered. It was a Cannes premiere section.
Yeah.
It's from Argentina, and I know it has to do with soccer. I don't know too much about it, but I do know it was very enthusiastically received.
I did not get a chance to see it, but everyone that I spoke to on the ground kind of fell in love with the piece.
Yeah, and it was one of their favorites.
Exactly. And it was also one of those films, I think, where everyone sort of told me, at least, that I went in not knowing what it was about, and then sort of thinking that it was going to be about sports. And it ends up being such a bigger, much more expansive piece. And there's, I think it's surrounding, a FIFA game in 1986, and a very infamous goal by Maradona. But it ends up being a much more expansive piece. And so no one has picked it up yet. But but it's a film that I'm confident will be picked up before the end of the year, because people spoke about it so highly. And I would imagine that it's also going to factor into documentary at some point. This was actually a surprisingly very memorable film for a lot of people.
Then you had the Ron Howard documentary Avedon, which is based on the photographer Richard Avedon.
Right, and Ron Howard's on that.
Yeah, I think there was some noise about that premiering.
People liked it. I think it was another special screening again. But the issue, I think, is, Ron Howard, Academy Award-winning Ron Howard, nominated a couple of times, has been working in documentary, it feels like, more and more often, but he hasn't found that project to break him through yet. And as much as there are fans for this film, I'm not sure this is the one yet.
Well, I know that he's sort of recovering a little bit from, his last film not doing so well. The film that went to TIFF and had a very starry cast. And Eden, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think he's relying a little bit on the documentary space.
Right.
To sort of...
And they've been successful. Yeah, I think they've been successful and they've been picked up. And Avedon has not been picked up yet, but I'm pretty sure that it will be. Yeah. Right. I'm just not sure it's the film that's going to get him into beyond a 15 film long list mention, excuse me.
Right, and there's also the Bruce Dern documentary Dernsey,
right, which I really wanted to see, and Bruce Dern was there, and Laura was there. Yeah. So Dernsey just looks like it looks like it chronicles Bruce Dern's life, and I'm sure there's going to be fans for the piece, and a lot of his co-stars, I believe, speak to working with him in the film. Mike Menendez, I believe, is the filmmaker here. And so I can't wait to see this movie. I'm not sure, again, it's going to be as a breakout enough piece to factor into the race, but certainly something that if you're a Bruce Dern fan, if you're a fan of, actors from the 70s,
must watch.
It's a must watch.
Right. Yeah. And then there was also, I just want to bring up an interesting documentary that did poorly, that I actually gave you my ticket for.
Oh my God. Yes.
Which was the John Lennon, The Last Interview from Steven Soderbergh.
And I think I was really looking forward to this film. Steven Soderbergh is a hero of ours. Soderbergh, yeah. So much of what I aspire to do and really kind of a North Star is, what Steven Soderbergh stands for and what he does. And so this film was a complete misfire and was incredibly disappointing. And is mostly made up of that final interview with John Lennon, which is kind of interesting, very interesting, actually. John Lennon, I think, certainly the Beatles, I guess, certainly having a moment right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
The films are coming out. Peter Jackson, who was there receiving the honorary Palme d'Or, I believe, has made a Beatles project recently. And so, like, a lot of attention's going on to the Beatles and unearthing, the archives of these musicians, and John Lennon certainly. And so this interview is there, and Yoko's on it as well. Also, their son recently won, I believe, animated short film at the Oscars. And so it's not surprising that John Lennon is getting another film treatment, this time from Steven Soderbergh. But there's a lot of AI footage in it that, aside from the debate, is just not good. We don't have to get into the waters of where AI fits in the industry. Bad AI fits nowhere. And I think this was bad AI, misused AI. And, you got Meta over there on the credits, and there was some Meta people in the audience that were very excited about it, but there were a lot of walkouts. And I think there was a lot of people who were disappointed with the film at the end. And I just feel like it's creatively very below what Steven Soderbergh can accomplish. And I actually had a very fascinating conversation with a colleague of mine who brought up the idea. They didn't see John Lennon. I told them to stay away. But they brought up the idea of how fascinating it is that you have this John Lennon documentary coming out at the same time when The Christophers is coming out. It has to do with art forgery. And so The Christophers is a film that we will revisit in a later episode. But I do think that's kind of fascinating, right? Yeah. But yeah, I think one of the biggest, if not the biggest misfires at Cannes is John Lennon, The Last Interview.
And then I want to bring up that it was an exceptional year at the festival for animated films. They were seemingly everywhere, and from very enthusiastic responses to very respectable responses. And I didn't get to see any of them, but you got to see many of them. Yeah. And I want to bring up three, which I think are top of mind for a lot of people. Let's start with Iron Boy, which was part of the Uncertain Regard section. And I think that it did end up winning an award from that section, the special jury prize.
Mm-hmm. Which I thought was kind of surprising. Iron Boy, sort of a very kind of coming of age story, animated film in French, I believe. Yeah, if I remember correctly. French title, Le Corset, I actually think is more appropriate than Iron Boy, the Corset. Um, Acquired by Sony Picture Classics
During the fest.
The crowd I saw it with liked it, and I enjoyed it as well. I don't think it's going to be the easiest film to market. I think there's a lot of heft, especially for a film that, revolves around a child protagonist. But that's what makes the film stand out also. And I feel like that's a virtue of the piece, is that it's not necessarily trying to be a breezy kids film or a breezy film of a child's point of view. I think there's a lot of hardship and growing pains that the protagonist goes through that are also very relatable. I'm just not sure that it's going to be easy to find an audience for it. And I want to say that, like, I remember last year, Little Amelie and Arco, I'm not going to say they found tremendous audiences either in the US, but I do worry about Iron Boy in the sense that I think one distributor that's particularly ill-equipped, or has kind of shown that they're kind of ill-equipped to launch an animated campaign that's sustainable and like can go the distance, is Sony Picture Classics. And so
didn't they do Waltz with Bashir?
They did do Waltz with Bashir, which actually only made it to foreign film, not animated film. But they also, I believe, they worked on films like Persepolis, right? And so Triplets of Belleville, of course. I mean, that was a huge breakout for them. But recently they've sort of hit a bump on the road, and they just haven't been able to execute a very reliable campaign in the animated feature race. And so they haven't had many successes there. I remember like last year, they also had Sylvain Chomet's film, A Magnificent Life, and that didn't register at all. They had they shot The Piano Player, I believe, a few years before then, or the year before, and again just didn't register. And so I fear that despite being one of the few animated films to make it to Uncertain Regard, it wins a prize there. A very very moving story, possibly a little too mature for the voters of that category, who are kind of looking for A, what makes money, and B, what my kid will have a reaction to. I don't feel that it's the slam dunk that they would have wanted. I also think visually, I think it really stuck out because it's a very distinct style. But I also know that because of its distinct style, it's not going to find the mass audience that some of these other films will find.
Right.
Even some of these animated films in Cannes, which I'm sure you're going to bring up.
Right. Yes, I didn't hear too much about it personally for me on the ground. But one film that I did hear more about was In Waves, which was part of the Critics Week section. And it's based on a graphic novel, and you did get a chance to see that as well.
Right. So it was in Critics Week, and I saw it with a crowd that was very much into it. This is an English language film based on adapted from a graphic novel, as you said. This is very bright and youthful and, dare I say, sentimental. This is going to be the kind of film that I think is going to be extremely easy for it to find an audience for. Netflix ended up picking it up, which is kind of interesting because Amazon is on the credits somewhere as an associate producer or something like that. So I was kind of thinking that maybe Amazon would pick it up for release, but Netflix actually bought it for release. And I have no doubt that there are going to be many, many, many fans for this film on Netflix. I think it was a great partnership.
Probably a surefire nominee for animated feature.
That's where I want to take a pause, because first of all, I think it's going to be a cutthroat year for animated feature, judging by how many films are coming out and how many films are well positioned to secure a nomination based just on branding and industry standing of their studios and the distributors. Here's the thing is that you look at last year's breakthrough nominees from Cannes, Little Amelie and Arco, and you look at something like Flow from the year before, right? In Waves, while it is, I think, a breakout hit from Cannes, even if it's on a side section, there's something very mainstream about it and extremely commercial and accessible. And it's almost like it doesn't have to be a Cannes movie. Part of the reason why it is a Cannes film is because, there is production money coming from Europe, and I think in particular France. But this is the kind of film that any major Hollywood studio could make and could release. And so I do have a little bit of a skepticism about how far it can make it. in the sense that if every year in the animated race, there's 1 or 2 spots reserved for more unique, bold, risky animated fare that usually comes from Europe. Think about Flow, or I Lost My Body. In Waves doesn't really fit that mold very well because it's almost too traditional, too conventional, too mainstream to sort of sit there, right? You think about Flow and the mute and then sort of the wordless characters, the dialogueless characters.
But maybe this is popular enough to fit on the other side.
That's my point, is that it would have to get in not on the international side, I think, unless they're not going to mind that it's, again, English language and kind of mainstream. It would have to get in on the mainstream side, right? The people who vote for, I'll go ahead and say it, Hoppers, and we'll talk about this in some other episode, but Hoppers looks like a surefire contender here. In Waves gets in because the voters who loved Hoppers also loved In Waves, but it doesn't get in from the memory of a snail people, right? It doesn't get in from the Flow voting base. Right. And so that's sort of my skepticism, is like, if there is enough popular American fare, Hoppers, Wildwood, whatever, does In Waves score high enough? Because these other international voters, I'm afraid they're going to go to an animated film that's a little bit more cutting edge than In Waves is. That said, maybe I'm wrong, and in the rest of the year, there won't be an international film that is incredibly cutting edge, and they would rather have any film that has international backing. And so they'll go ahead and vote for In Waves. But I just want to make it clear to listeners that In Waves is not Robot Dreams. In Waves is not I Lost My Body. In Waves is very much something like what you would see traditionally off Netflix. That's why Netflix bought it. Right. And there's another, I think, possibly problematic element here, which I'm think you're going to bring up.
Well, yeah, I was going to bring up that the last, again, it was a big year for animated films in Cannes, but the last one we're going to bring up was Tangles, which premiered also as a special screening. Seth Rogen's company is attached to it. It doesn't have a buyer yet. I think that we're going to talk about that, but I will say that, I didn't get a chance to see it. You did. But based on the reactions I saw on the ground, people were coming out with tears in their eyes and crying and very emotional. So I think I have an idea of what it's about. But it's certainly a very emotional response from the audiences that did see it at Cannes.
Yeah. So I guess I'm happy that you brought that up because, again, I think one of the detriments to In Waves, which is also, again, a tearjerker, is that Tangles exists in the same Oscar race, in the same award season. And so they're very much, in my opinion, sister projects stylistically. One
is in black and white, right?
That's Tangles. What I was going to say, that while they're both not, 3D animated films, they are, they have a similar aesthetic, but one is monochromatic and one is excessively colorful, right? One of them is focused on the mother-daughter relationship. The other is focused on a romantic relationship. And both of them, I think, are conventionally are sort of stories that are very accessible, and they have their sort of artistic ambitions, but that not to such a degree where they'll alienate audiences, or again are incredibly bold films. Again, like I Lost My Body, for example. I think Tangles has the benefit of having Seth Rogen and Point Grey behind it, as you just mentioned. And I will say that Point Grey, has in particular has the advantage, I think, of them having been behind the sort of the visual breakthrough of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, which got pretty close to a nomination and sort of failed at the end. And so Point Grey is trying to make, I think, a space for themselves in sort of the animated world of film, animated filmmaking, especially animated filmmaking in America. And it feels like they're pressing the right buttons to be taken more seriously this time. It's more adult driven. It has, stronger human stakes to it. It's more challenging. It's monochromatic. It's not just spectacle. It's not just IP. It's not just branding. But I think I worry that these two films are going to end up canceling each other out. And so I would have said that the best place to buy Tangles is also Netflix. And now Netflix has In Waves. Do they go ahead and buy Tangles too? I'm not sure. I think Tangles could make money at the box office. I think Neon wants a contender here, so look for Neon to possibly buy this one.
That's true.
And I think with Seth's reputation, with Point Grey, it's probably a little bit ahead of In Waves. Again, they're both based on graphic novels. Also, the sort of just the
isn't there something medical attached to Tangles?
Yeah,
also?
there's something medical attached to both of them, really.
Oh, really?
So in Tangles, you know, it's Alzheimer's and dementia, and I think what helps make Tangles stand out is the participation, for example, of Julie Louis-Dreyfus, right? Bryan Cranston, all these bigger Hollywood names. I think are going to be able to get it over the hump. The question is who buys it. And so if we say Netflix is off the table, Neon could still do it. Maybe they can make money off it. I think Seth Rogen has a good relationship with Sony Pictures, which sort of negates the whole Sony Classics thing. Maybe Universal. You know, it's a film that could find an audience if it's released in theaters. It's just a question of who's going to release it. And again, is there room for both of those films? So like, as I said, there's usually room for an international animated film. Usually that international animated film has like breadcrumbs at the Cannes Film Festival or a major film festival, usually can. But when we talk about the slate of films that you just mentioned, it's sort of tough, right? Because you have Iron Boy, which I think is possibly going to be too outside and being campaigned by someone who isn't the best at getting into animated feature. And then you have these two other films, right? Both of which are, dare I say, a little bit more mainstream and quote unquote Americanized. And don't stand the best shot at getting that international, bold, risk-taking animation vote. And they could potentially cancel each other out at the same time. So again, like the voting base for Hoppers, again, would have to vote for the Seth Rogen film, Tangles. But at least for Tangles, I think you're going to have the benefit of Tangles, I think, is going to get a strong PG-13. It's not going to be a PG film, PG-13. I doubt it gets the R. It may get the R, though.
Really?
But there are going to be some people who say, yeah, because there is also a queer element and queer themes to the film, right? The lead character is queer. Maybe that's going to be enough for voters to say, oh, well, that's how I'm going to, diverge from the Toy Stories and the Hoppers, and I'm going to nominate this film that, although it is very American, had a very big international premiere and deals with, for example, more mature topics like Alzheimer's and queer identity.
Right.
So I guess maybe that would be the angle there. Of the three, I would argue that the one that I would like the best right now in the animated feature race would be Tangles as soon as it gets a good distributor.
But which of the three do you personally like the most?
Of the three, my personal favorite is actually Iron Boy. I thought it was the most distinct.
Right. Very, very, very interesting stuff. Well, that concludes our rundown of our Cannes 2026 experience and running down some of the prevalent titles that were in the, Oscar conversation or might be in the Oscar conversation in the coming months. We very fortunate to attend the festival. We loved being there. And it's been fun running down these titles. Yeah.
Thank you for listening. Follow us on our website, framesandflicker.com, or on Twitter at Academy Anon. And thank you for joining us on a new season of Academy Anonymous.
We look forward to spending time with you guys. And as always, it's been a pleasure.
See you next time. If you've been enjoying the Academy Anonymous podcast and want to support the work we're doing, there's a voluntary support link in the show notes. Totally optional. Just a way to help us keep the podcast going. Thank you for listening.
The music on this episode, entitled Cool Cats, was graciously provided by Kevin MacLeod and Incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. http://creativecommons.org/licenses/by/3.0.
Disclaimer. The Academy Anonymous podcast is in no way affiliated or endorsed by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences.